A special meeting from 6 until 7. We're hoping Councilmember Dembowski could join us here for dinner and we'd have a nice conversation about a number of issues. But he is still chairing a county council meeting. They've got a controversial issue in front of them. They had over 100 public comments, so we're not sure if he's going to make it or not. But we have one of his staffers, Garrett. Your last name, sorry.
Holbrook.
Oh, that's right, Garrett Holbrook. One of his key people is here tonight, and he's going to sort of fill in for Rod and sort of tell us what's going on in different areas. So anyway, I'll try to make sure that you not have a mouthful of food here, but you deserve to eat, Garrett.
I'll survive.
Your mother-in-law will kill me if I don't let you eat. All right, so then where would you like to start? We've got some definite things on the agenda, but if you want to say a few opening things in that, then please.
Sure.
Go right ahead.
My name is Garrett Holbrook. I work for Councilmember Dembowski. I've been on his staff since he joined the county council in 2013, so I can generally field to some extent, answers on just about any topic on here, and I've got all of the talking points for today. So I'll do my very best Rod impression. I'm very sorry that he's not here. We did have an emergency walk-on moratorium that a council member introduced at the start of the meeting today to ban major fossil fuel facilities in unincorporated King County. With the support of the environmental community, there were well over 100 folks signed up for public comment. So as you might imagine, that has led to a very lengthy council meeting, one that started at 1:30 today and has included several executive sessions. So it has been a long day down there, and hopefully Rod will get here tonight to make it for, at the very least, your regular meeting, and hopefully schedule one of these with him sometime in the near future. I'm happy to go in whatever order you would like, or answer any questions you might have, or give you updates on kind of the way things have been going. I know most of the things on here kind of generally relate to our budget process, which wrapped up at the end of last year. Rod was one of the 4 members on the budget leadership team that takes the executive's transmitted budget and adds the council's priorities and amends and adds things, many of the priorities that are on your list or topics of discussion there. Rod was just elected chair of the county council, so he'll serve for the next year in that position. Thereabouts, we do a restructure once a year and reorganize into different committees, and of that, the general council structure is reorganized once a year. So I've got all of the information if you have any questions around where your priorities might be headed in the county council's regulatory structure. So wherever you'd like to start, Mr. Mayor.
So first of all, we really need to thank him, and I'm going to make sure that we do thank him personally, but we really appreciate his work on the Navigator program to obtaining funding. That's been a tremendous asset for our communities, and I know the police are pleased with it, and anything we can do to help the community, I think, is beneficial. Do you want to explain a little bit of the Navigator program and what it is?
Sure. This is one of the programs I think Rod is most proud of in the budget and in his time on the county council. It is, to the best of my knowledge, I'll explain it. It's not a piece that I staff personally, but the budget includes $780,000 for the 1920 biennium from the Mental Illness and Drug Dependency Sales Tax Fund to fund the
Which in the
radar
grand
program.
scheme of things is a relatively small amount.
Yes, $1 million in mid is on the larger. It's rather small on the big picture, but for this program, I think what you were working with last year in the just a couple $100,000, what the communities in the North End have been able to accomplish has been tremendous. I think Rod likes to say that it's very clear that this has saved lives and improved outcomes for folks who've been impacted by this program, and I think that's a big credit to the cities in the North End being willing to collaborate and stretch those dollars as best they can. But we've got $780,000 for the upcoming biennium. The RADAR program is the Response, Awareness, De-escalation, and Referral program. and the Mental Health Navigator program, and you all work with Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Bothell, and Kirkland on that program. with your law enforcement agencies to help de-escalate potential conflicts before they happen. I don't know how aware you all are of the program, but Rod is a tremendous advocate of it down at the county council, and is happy to support that request and kind of work with your law enforcement folks and your city manager and the North End cities that are participating to make it a model for King County, because it is so impactful and cost effective, and work with, I know the law enforcement folks have been working with the training academy to try and make this a piece of their training and work with them on ways to improve the program and expand it around the county and the state.
Can you speak a little bit, just a sentence or two, on what the program actually does?
Sure. When law enforcement are interacting with an individual with either a known behavioral, if they have a known history to have a mental illness or a behavioral problem that might present in a way that the officer would respond maybe defensively to, or might present maybe a confrontation that we wouldn't want the person, a bad outcome. If we know that in advance, we'll send a mental health professional, one of these navigators, with the officer to help de-escalate the situation and use different tactics to approach the problem and refer them to services, kind of reducing the possibility that there'll be a negative outcome and get that person connected with services and not on a revolving cycle into our criminal justice system.
There's a lot of people in jail that mental illness that don't really need to be in jail. It was handled differently at the beginning, and so this program helps do that. So
yeah, I know the specific example I can remember from Kirkland, working with a younger person, young adult, whose parent flagged for the department that they might be having some trouble, and the department knew. So when a situation arose that they felt it was appropriate to respond with a police officer, the police officer responded with the navigator, and they were able to resolve the situation with no violence and get that person referred to services rather than into the criminal justice system. Yeah.
Can I just say I've got to second the value of such a program thousandfold.
Mm-hmm.
My wife was a public school teacher, and some years ago she taught first grade, had a very young student who later, 20 years later, I guess, we read, was shot in North Seattle. He was mentally ill, and his uncle had called the police, and somehow it escalated, and the guy had a crowbar on the front porch, and yet he was angry about a pizza and beer. Somehow many officers appeared, but he can't help but think, every time I hear about this, that maybe if there were professional there, maybe the outcome would have been different. So exactly what
Yeah, and I think the response from the law enforcement officials who've been able to work with the navigator and the way they think, I guess, what they've told us, they think a little bit differently now when they approach those situations, and they seek out the navigator on strategies and tools to use in their policing in the community, and how to recognize these situations and deal with them differently so the outcomes are better. Yeah.
And that was going to be my comment, that there's really two benefits. One is the direct benefit of having the navigator on site. The other is having the officers watch them through that process. Because I know the officers receive a lot of training, but it's different when it's a classroom versus one-on-one. I see how this works. So then that would be generalized to other situations when the navigator isn't there.
Yeah, certainly that's the case. And I think the law enforcement folks and your city manager and the North End city managers collectively coming and talking to the county council made all the difference in the world, because I can tell you a little bit about it, but when they make the case from their long careers in law enforcement that this is really making a difference, I think folks really relate and believe what they say, because it is so heartfelt, and you could see it on paper, the difference it makes.
Did you have something? Go ahead.
I did.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, did you say, Garrett, did you say this was a pilot program, or is this a permanent? I know it's sort of in the early phases. I was just trying to see if you could shed any light on what the future is and what you see happening.
I think it is growing pilot program. I think the first initial payment was definitely, I think in the pilot phases, it has helped inform a university level study on how these contacts result in different outcomes. So in that sense, it was definitely a pilot. I think our hope is that it becomes more than that. I think this is a tripling or more of the funding, so it's becoming more established, but it is definitely not a permanent line in the budget. It is, at this point, just an add-on.
Great, thank you.
So, moving on, we, as you know, Kenmore has been actively pursuing a ferry, passenger-only ferry here in Kenmore for quite some time. And there was, I think, 5 demonstration routes back in 2006, 2007 announced, and Kenmore was on the list. And we have been doggedly harassing as many people down in the county as we have, and we've worked our way to number 1 on the list. And so we really appreciate the council members' help in obtaining funding for a development plan. And so we want to thank him very much for that. And
Yeah, this is one of the issues I was happy to help work on. And I've
I
had
know
many
you've been
conversations
working
with
on this
you and
one, yes.
your city manager about. You should have a report back. It's due by July, the end of July next year. So we hope the department, 2020, yeah. We hope the department is ramping up. We know, we've had conversations with them about the implementation. I've got the language if you have any questions about what is actually in the requirement. You know, it's a full assessment of the ridership projections and possible facilities, and a discussion of, you know, potential leasing locations and all of the necessary facilities to make something happen, and an action plan to move the line forward. So that is kind of where we are. I know we get calls into our office from folks who just hear about it and are so excited
Yeah,
up and down the
yeah,
east side.
there's a lot of interest here for that. I know that SECO, the development company down in South Lake Union, they're the old Boeing property that built the Hyatt Regency and a number of other offices, are funding a passenger-only ferry from Renton to South Lake Union. And so we obviously wanted to somehow be part of that. So we do appreciate your efforts. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think there's definitely interest around the council in some of the other routes that were in the study, the Shell Shoal route, for example, and that Renton route. And Rod has an interest, since, you know, the Ferry District serves all of King County, to make sure that, you know, Kenmore's interests are a part of that conversation, because it is one of the routes that has the most potential for
Right.
success.
Also, we received a grant that is allowing us to build a boathouse at Rhododendron Park with partial funding from the council member. And so that's going to serve our rowing community and kids. And interestingly enough, last year, Inglemoor High School started a rowing program. We had no idea how it was going to work out, but 68 kids signed up. It was a huge success. And the other high schools started screaming because they wanted a rowing program too. So now there's 3 more high schools involved: Woodinville, Bothell, and or maybe, and there's another one, I think. But in any event, North Creek. So we're excited about that. I know the superintendent, Dr. Reed, has promised us a national championship here in Kenmore, and she's got 4 more years to deliver on it. So I'm holding her feet to the fire on that. But thank you so much. And I know there's another round of funding coming from the youth recreation program. So
Yep.
we'll be there.
To the extent there are more applications, I know I've mentioned this to Rob, but to any of you who know of anything, the deadline is quickly approaching to get into the next capital round. Letters of intent are due to the county by the end of this month, with formal applications due a month or so after that. So,
I know also that one of the things that the council member is interested in is the Regional Aquatic Center. And I think there's some money available to fund that. Can you talk about that a little bit? Yep. Sure.
Yeah, so we are looking forward to the next round of funding, and we're really grateful for the rowing piece of it. We also have paddling programs, and we even have somebody in our audience who is interested in applying for that next round of funding. Dan Henderson in the back with Cascade Canoe and Kayak, and he's looking to acquire property in Kenmore to grow youth paddling programs. So I think you'll probably be looking for an application from him and others as well.
Yeah, and any applications that you all get, before I forget, there is a second bucket of funding. It's not just capital. There are small grants available to teams that serve underserved youth, that provide access or equipment to folks who can't afford it. Those are in the $5,000 and up range. And the deadline is the same. I think the competition is maybe not as rigorous. It's not, 5 applications all for $1 million competing over $3 million. So if you know folks who may need that money, feel free to send them our way or to the County Parks Department. And anybody who does submit an application, let us know so that we can be an advocate for that application.
So then any of the paddling programs in the community that are serving some of the underprivileged kids, they would be eligible for that?
They would, yeah.
And I know we definitely appreciated, the council had also call to at least include basketball courts. That may not seem like a novelty youth body, but it's definitely important. So we look forward to, maybe it's too late for this cycle to apply. And look forward to like any ongoing activity for our lower income kids in our urban corridors.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent you ever run across a sports and recreation-related project, send it our way, and we may not always have access to funding or funding in a great amount, but when it comes up and we have a list, sometimes the turnaround is so quick, knowing what the projects are is what gets it done. Yeah.
One of the best investments cities ever made was a basketball court at Rhododendron. That thing is in use constantly. So to try to duplicate the half court over here is certainly something we want to do. Yeah, Brent?
What is the dollar amount that you have for a funding period? And approximately how many applications on the initial one, not the secondary smaller ones?
Off the top of my head, we wrote the program, so I should know the answer to all these questions. I think the total pot of money is somewhere in the $3 million range. I think it's $3 million for the capital, and then $1.5 million and $1.5 million for the other 2 programs.
Okay.
I know last time maybe a dozen applications on the capital side.
Okay.
There's an additional unincorporated funding bucket that's a little harder. You have to serve kids in the unincorporated area. Because of our jurisdiction, we have that bucket. But those applications are a little harder to find. But I think we were able to allocate all of the funding in the last round for the other 2 buckets of funds. But
Thank you.
I can get you better numbers on
No,
that.
that's fine, thank you.
Okay. Aquatic Center.
If Rod gets here, I'll let him talk about it. I'm happy to give you kind of the general overview. We're in the kind of the planning phase of the Parks Levy for its renewal on the August ballot later this year. That's the plan at the moment. Rod has been in those conversations with the executive staff on what they will propose to the council. We expect them to transmit it in the very near future. They've got a quick deadline, kind of the end of April for adoption, early May, so that we can get it on the ballot. Those are our timelines. And Rod has been talking to city councils and folks up in the north end about trying to find a way to get a penny or more in the levy for pools somewhere in that neighborhood, which would generate, not enough money to build an aquatic center, they can be expensive, and when you factor in all of the other community spaces that you may want to make a successful facility in a city or in a collection of cities, they get pretty pricey. I know Kirkland's proposed facility was in the $60 million neighborhood. A penny would generate something like $44 million countywide over the life of the next levy. So somewhere in that neighborhood would be available to be split up countywide. You could make a serious dent in one or two pools, or a smaller dent in a couple of other pools. So that's been a priority for Rod in his conversations with county leadership, to see whether or not there might be some room in the levy for priorities like that would serve communities like the North End, which is in kind of dire need with pools closing regularly, it seems. It's something we hear a lot about, and it's something that rose to the top of the county's last planning survey in 2011, heading into the last parks levy on the ballot. You know, they are facilities that folks don't want us to run and operate, but they recognize the regional importance of them and the need for the county to be a participant in those facilities so that they can get built.
I know, Joe, this is near and dear to your heart. Have you got anything you want to say here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Or a question. So what might be, imagine this whole hypothetical were to go to a higher plane of existence, ideal plane, how much approximately might be like Kenmore's share of that 44 million be?
I don't know that that's a question I know the answer to. I think any funding that would be available would, I think Rod would want regional participation and to kind of set the tone that this is, region-wide. So I'm not entirely sure what the mechanism for distributing funding would be, because once you start to whittle it down to as your parks levy pass-through dollars today, you see the size of it. It's not insignificant, but it's not so much that you can do a big facility with. So I think there are additional conversations that would be had around how that funding would be split up, and what sort of regional participation would be required. But I think Rod has thought a little bit more about that. I don't know what he's thinking entirely on the
I know
specifics.
he's had conversations with Shoreline and Lake Forest Park,
Mhm.
which would be good, but they're talking over on 15th,
Mhm.
about, I think, 185th, 175th in that
Yep.
region. Whereas us with Bothell and Woodinville, I mean,
Mhm.
there's that parkland that was acquired, the old golf course, where a facility could fit very nicely,
Mhm.
of a regional nature. So
Yeah, I think
rather than just being Kenmore, we could get, I think, like you said, regionally, a little bit more bang for the buck if we went in with Bothell and perhaps Woodinville. So
yeah, the county has an additional facility that we do operate down in Federal Way, the Weyerhaeuser Aquatic Center, and so that's a major regional facility, and I think Rod would look for opportunities to kind of identify regions around the county where major facilities could be sited, and kind of a minimum threshold for the amount of investment, and then maybe a cap on what percentage of the total cost of the facility might represent what our investment would be. Yeah.
I know the swimming venues with the Special Olympics that were here last summer, that was down in Federal Way, and we had bowling up here, and it would be nice maybe in the future to have bowling in addition to swimming. So, yeah. Anybody else on the pool? Yes.
So what's your timeline for making decisions on this project?
The Parks levy should be transmitted from the executive to the council within the next month and a half, or less. It's got to go. It hasn't been referred yet, so the executive has to finish their work and send the proposal to us. And we would anticipate at this time that it would go to the Regional Policy Committee, which requires a dual referral and then a vote at the Regional Policy Committee, and then a vote back at the Budget Committee at the council, and then action by the county council. And if any of you watched the VETS Human Services Levy renewal last year, that was a lot of ping-ponging back and forth between those committees. And so timeline is much shorter, but I think there's an acknowledgement that, as quickly as we can get to work on this is that's the stage we're at. To get on the ballot, I think the end of April is the timeline for the county council to place it. So. we're running out of time, and the RPC meets once a month.
Rod chaired, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Rod had mentioned if, after we got more detail, and if we county might be looking for letters of support from the various cities, when roughly might that be? When roughly might those be needed?
I would, I think at this point, Rod's, trying to get a commitment from the executive on the proposal and his colleagues, and probably around the time of transmittal, so when it gets sent to the county council and the regional policy committee for their look at the legislation. I think it would be probably the end of March would be my guess. The March meeting would be the ideal meeting from our process standpoint, the March meeting of the RPC. Yeah.
Yeah, Brent.
A question on just on the logistics on the funding for something like this. So from the county side, and this is a really probably a very fundamental basic question, but I'm not sure exactly how it works. So when you are raising money specifically for a Parks and Rec need, is that money designated towards specific projects, or is it distributed relatively evenly among each of the districts of the council members, or how is equity factored in, and what role does that play in the distribution of the funds?
I think ensuring an equitable distribution of the funds is kind of Rod's biggest goal in this funding package. I know it's a big topic for him generally in the Parks Levy, and making sure that the North End gets its fair share of funding for items. With this item in particular, I think he would look for language in the ballot measure and the implementation plan that defines regions that would receive funding, if that makes sense. There is no required mechanism. It's kind of, however it's drafted will be the mechanism for funding. There is no...
It could be who has the most compelling project could end up having a share of whatever the funding source is. Is that what you're saying?
The projects themselves wouldn't be identified in the levy that goes to the ballot. Kind of a set of parameters would be defined, and an implementation plan that identifies how the region would share the money. So I think the plan that's transmitted to the council and worked through the RPC and then adopted and sent to the ballot is where you would craft language that identifies how the region would share the money. And to date, I have seen no proposed language on how that would be done just yet, if that makes sense.
When we get a little further along,
Yeah.
then you and Rod could share that with us, what we could do to provide the most compelling case for what we would like to see happen up here.
Certainly, yeah. I am happy to chat with you more kind of about what we've heard and kind of where the region is at on those things, but nothing is to this point, I think, even on paper on how to hash it out.
Thank you.
Rod chaired the RTC for the last few years, and I'm sure he's not doing it now that he's council chair. But again, another thank you. Bus Route 234 and the fact that we didn't lose the high school students at that reconsideration of the rerouting. Can you talk about that for a minute?
I can, yeah. Rod was I guess a big advocate of this restructure from the beginning. The northeast side restructure kind of fundamentally revolves around the 255 from Kirkland to downtown Seattle. I'm sure you've all had a number of briefings on this. One kind of a no change proposal, and kind of the altered 234 that would have served Bastyr, which would have been new service, and to deliver that service, they would have removed service from Northeast 155th and 84th, which was, by Metro's estimation, actually a pretty well-used corridor. The the pickups and drop-offs on that corridor were reasonably high. It wasn't an underperforming segment, and it serves Inglemoor High School, which is a major destination. And I think Rod's experience chairing the Transportation Committee before and the Regional Transportation Committee has been, to not disrupt the travel patterns that folks have developed and rely on, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense to take folks' service away in search of new riders, even though Bastyr is a very compelling destination and a place we hope to get to in the very near future, either with fixed route service or one of our alternative services that Metro is developing now. So he made the case to Metro that it was a very important route and a very important kind of service alignment that should be in place. One disappointing bit about the Northeast Side restructure was initially projected to go into service in September of this year. We're hearing now that due to some Sound Transit work in the tunnel that it's likely to be March of 2020. There's some changes that are going to construction work in the tunnel that are going to require 12-minute headways for the Sound Transit's Link Light Rail at the start of January in 2020. And Metro didn't think it wise to divert a bunch of folks to UW Station and then hit them with limited service for the first few months of the change. And so they're proposing to delay the start of it until March of 2020 now. But we'll still vote at the council. Rod will still vote on the package in March of this year. So the service change will be adopted, but won't take effect until March of 2020 is the proposed timeline.
The one thing that I think that we appreciate is the council members and staffs listening to the communities in the district. You guys have been very responsive to our concerns and our requests, and we want to thank you for that. Thank you very much. ST3, Bus Rapid Transit and Parking Garage.
Your Honor, I can speak to that if you wish.
Yeah, that would be great. I can do the, well, well, make sure you get to the TOD too, because that's the good part. But
Or
anyway,
should I
go
save
right
that
ahead.
for you?
No,
Don't
no.
want to steal your thunder.
No, you go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so we've been working with Sound Transit on possible locations for the parking garage. We're looking at a couple. I think given where we're at with Lake Point, or where we're not at with Lake Point, I should say, the Metro Park and Ride is probably likely going to be the landing spot for that garage. The key there, and we're making this loud and clear with Sound Transit, and that is it can't be just a big ugly monolith of a parking garage. It needs to take advantage of the fact that it's going to be in our transit-oriented district, that it can have housing wrapped around it or on top of it. We can tap into the various resources we have for affordable housing, so affordable housing can go with the parking garage. The resources that we have with Arch and other sources, including the county's latest funding source for affordable housing, and making sure it's designed well. So again, it's not some battleship gray Soviet era style building. You know, it needs to fit the quality and character of our community. So that's more of an FYI to you guys because it's going on King County property, but we're working very closely with Sound Transit on the design and all the various uses that can go with it.
Yeah, and as a result of the conversation we've had with you and the mayor about the highest levels in Metro to make sure they're aware of kind of the project itself and the opportunities that exist at the site to do more than just a parking garage.
And we really want to get this down to the 30% level. That's why we're bringing Arch in and that, and relying on much of the outside funding and seniors, and just the community in general, down to the 35% level. So
Do you have any sense on the council or Metro?
I think Metro's very, ride our service and has access and big priorities. The Northgate site is a pretty big example with the city to do a major build, and I think that post for these projects as link makes the county.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think as you may know, that I co-chair the proposed county bond funding on that and some of the other opportunities that we're going to be made about. Can you talk about a little of the bond funding that the county is working on?
Yeah, the county, the $100 million in workforce housing, so the county recently allocated $100 million in funding from the lodging tax, and within that, ROD secured an $8 million carve-out for the north end, just for the cities up here to have a shot at. Unfortunately, it is not, and those sorts of things.
No, I know that's a substantial pot of money, and we just need to identify the programs. And that's one of the things that we're looking at there for getting affordability down to the 30%.
Your Honor, if I
Yes.
can add something to that. So
Please.
we would like to make a go at that. And I think what we plan on doing is partnering with a property owner or owners and submitting a proposal. It would be a joint proposal with the city, the property owner, and Arch. And in accessing or requesting some or all of that $8 million to produce a real meaningful affordable housing project on real property in Kenmore. So that's our intent. It's going to take us a couple months to produce such a proposal, but we're working on it.
Yeah, just keep us in the loop, and I'm happy to circle back with you on kind of how this will all work. We unfortunately just lost our longtime staffer who handled all these issues to a new job. We're very happy for her, but we're all playing catch up.
Hey, there he is. All right. We were just talking about,
How fast did you drive?
no, that, you did good to get here that quick. Did you have a police escort? We were just on affordable housing, some of the bond opportunities, and $8 million you've got for up in this area. If you'd like. Garrett's done a tremendous job. I don't know about that, but he's done a good job.
Thank you, Nigel.
There you go.
Well, I apologize for being late. We had a walk-on emergency ordinance today. Maybe Garrett told you that generated 100+ people coming to testify, and so I firmly believe in public testimony and not cutting it off. So we heard it all, and then we had to act. Just jumping in where Garrett left off. Thank you for the opportunity to join you, and I'm happy to come back and be with you again. But I regularly, I think as you all know, meet with your city manager and mayor to update them on things we're working on at the county, and obviously take input and feedback. In the budget, we allocated lodging tax proceeds this year, and I secured for the first time ever a specific allocation for North End of $8 million for affordable housing, workforce housing, 30 to 80% of area median income. So to the extent that you're working on projects, and I know there are some potential ones here in the city, please know that that opportunity is there. We also put, Garrett will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a couple $100,000 in for a North End regional collaboration initiative if the North End cities want to do this, much like Arch for a regional housing coalition on the east side. The South County cities were forming kind of a coalition to work on affordable housing issues. So I said, well, let's put a little North End housing money in there. And I've previewed that with NUSA as perhaps an organization that might help convene the North End cities. It's fairly undefined, so there's an opportunity in terms of resources here to take it and run with it, if you will, to kind of help maybe develop a North End strategy. I'm happy to talk more about affordable housing, but given the limited time, I really want to talk to you about the Parks Levy, because that's coming down the pike. Okay, we're putting it together, and Garrett, do you have the little one-pager? This is one of the first things I voted on when I came on the council 6 years ago, and it's up for renewal, and the executive branch has kind of prepared a draft budget, which is talking about just under 17 cents per $1,000 of assessed value on a $500,000 home. That would be about $84 a year, $7 a month. Generally, remember, this is the levy that takes care of our regional parks and trails. In Kenmore, primarily that's the Burt Gilman Trail. So, David, one of my very first questions was, I want to see the budget for maintenance, particularly on blackberry control, but just general maintenance through the city, right? Because I think that's a core function here, and I know we've replanted, with some new vegetation here along Brewery Row, as it's becoming called, and we'll see if that's better. But I was up a week or two ago, and I can see we trim back to the line on the hill over here, but as spring comes, I know that'll kick in. But maintenance is an issue. And I will tell you, the map is fairly light on the north end. There's a big investment in the East Side Rail Corridor because that project's keyed up, and I think that's a good project for connectivity, including users of the Burke. But I've asked for some more work and perhaps investment in over at the Wayne Golf Course land where the Tolt, Sammamish, and Burke come together. We have a great opportunity to connect those there now that we help preserve that land in Bothell. But there's not dollars in this draft, and I want to make sure we've got some dollars in there so when the planning process is concluded here in the next couple of years, we can build it and not wait for another 6 or 7. In addition, just for balance, a lot of north end dollars go into this, and our folks go out, even though it's not in district, our constituents use the regional assets here. But a couple of things I'm interested in pushing the county to explore. One is north end regional recreational facilities. We put some rental tax, obviously, into potential ball fields at St. Ed's. Obviously, there's some EIS work that has to be done there that's delayed that. But that doesn't mean there isn't a strong need. I think, as you all know, you've had testimony in these chambers from folks saying we've got a shortage, people are driving far. I don't have a specific project in mind, although I've talked about the Lake Point site land as perhaps an alternative in your analysis of whether there could be some recreational facilities there. But I'd like to try and, if it's of interest to you, put a plug in this budget for North County regional recreational active recreation sports ball fields, number one. Would welcome your feedback on that. Number two is swimming pools. The county, in the early 90s got out of the pool business. It was killing us from an operational perspective. Had the one at St. Ed's, was a forward thrust pool. The forward thrust pool in Shoreline is 50 years old. They've got to shut it down. I know here in the North Shore School District, losing the high school facilities, and there's a great need. I view these as kind of a regional, again, athletic facility, and also through an equity lens. If you have money, you can get on the wait list and buy into the neighborhood pool, right? It took us 10 years to get into ours, and I know that we have the one here in Kenmore. If you can get in, and then you can afford to pay the bills. But public pools are something that I think our region needs, and in the north end, we've got a shortage of. The county runs the Weyerhaeuser Aquatic Center in Federal Way. It was built for the Goodwill Games. It's really our only full. I don't think we will have the wherewithal to get into the pool operational business, but I think in this levy there's a chance to have a capital grants fund for northeast and south, and between a penny and a half, 2 pennies, it could generate between $42 and $84 million over the 6 years, which is real money to kind of top off a couple of these initiatives. So I'm looking to do that. I've got a little draft proposal to them for a north end bucket of, which would be $10.5 million at the 1 penny, or $21 million at the 2 pennies, $15 million at the penny and a half. But particularly given the light, what I'd call the light investment in the north end, I think between the regional recreational facility idea and the pool fund, which I envision as almost two, one kind of northwest Shoreline Lake Forest Park, one North Shore School District, which is trying. I know these are in various stages of development. The Shoreline one may be a little further advanced. They're looking at a bond major, but they're talking about a smaller pool without a dive tank, and the community would really like to have a little bigger one, and that kind of money could top it off. So that's coming down the pike relatively quickly, and I want to get it on your radar screen and get some feedback to see if there was interest in that or anything else.
Well, see, I know Shoreline and Lake Forest Park. I've been talking the regional pool idea, and I think certainly the size of the district, especially when you take North Shore into consideration, something between Bothell and Kenmore, like there at the old Wayne Golf Course, would be a nice facility for perhaps a pool where Woodinville, Bothell, and Kenmore could go in. in a regional facility. I understand the necessity to keep it regionally focused, and I think that's really a good idea, and I think that's the way it's going to succeed, so.
Garrett's just handing out, this is again a draft, internal draft discussion document on how the rate could be allocated to fund the system. Sure.
Oh, yeah, Rod?
I don't know who's in charge of this meeting.
Well,
Not
he
me.
doesn't look over here very often, so.
Right in.
Thanks, Brad.
So, thanks for making it, because honestly, when I saw you on the screen, I thought there was no way you'd be
Oh,
out
sorry.
here. So I appreciate that. I have a question. So on a project on a levee like that, obviously you don't know much about the scope or scale or maybe even location until well after you have to vote on it.
Yes.
And how long, I don't know if there's a restriction on the time frame before there's a termination, but if you vote to approve something, and I'm specifically looking at both the projects you talked about, whether it was ball fields or it was aquatics, it's very likely there could be no definitive project for 5-6 years maybe. And what happens with that money, or how does that factor into this process?
It's a good question, Brett, and the working notion on these that we've got is if projects were not identified and allocation for funding by a certain time in the levy, maybe it's 4 or 5 years into it, you could reallocate to additional athletic facilities or regional trails, so the dollars could be, still put to use. At least that's one notion.
Okay, thank you. And the reason I asked is because it was something, I visualized something similar to that youth grant that you were
Yeah,
so
right.
effective in getting, and then,
have to
we
re-
couldn't use it for
Yeah.
what the purpose was because of the deadlines that we're approaching. And so that's the only thing I want to know, I wanted to get a sense of what we need to do on our end
Yeah.
to make sure we don't run into a similar situation on a much larger funding source.
Joe?
Want to thank you so much for bringing this up and bringing at least one step closer to reality. It's absolutely needed. Thousands of us grew up learning how to swim, pool, and tax themselves to get it done. The local government did this. Work again has to be fulfilled, I think, certainly serves equity. How much Mike Kenmore's, in an ideal world, amount of funds, would there be any restrictions on how it might be used? I totally echo the mayor's observations on perhaps something to be done at Wayne Golf Course or in conjunction with Bothell and or the school district.
All right. Well, I think right now I've been focused on getting the resource available and planting the seeds, if you will, to see if there's interest in it. And I get a lot of nods. I mean, from the swimming community, from the school districts, from other elected leaders that, yeah, this is something we need to do. Again, this is our office's own working concept that I'm handing out to you, a rate in the levy of 1, 1.5, 2 cents divided 4 ways. North County, which I define as north of 145th. So, up here, East King County, South King County, and then existing pools. Again, capital grant money. That's kind of something for everyone in there. City of Seattle has old pools that are falling down. They put a lot of money into this levy. The east side, as you know, Kirkland failed a couple years ago in a ballot initiative to get a pool going, but the cities of Kirkland, Redmond, and Bellevue are still kind of talking and want to get something going. And then there are there are pools throughout the county that could still use a little capital maintenance money. Again, we wouldn't get into the operation of it, but I think at these numbers, it's something that is could be material in getting a project from red or yellow to a green, to go.
So, we told Garrett,
Yes.
now you're here.
Uh-oh.
So we want to tell you.
Councilmember Curtis had a question too, or comment.
I don't care who goes.
Save me, Milt.
We want to thank you very, very
Oh.
much for the funding that you got for the Navigator program. That's a tremendous resource for the North End. We really, really appreciate that. The funding that you got for the passenger ferry development, thank you so much for that. It means a lot to the community. And certainly the youth recreation grant money that we received has been tremendous. And your work on the RTC and listening to us on the Metro 234.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that I said is you and your office staff really listen to the communities. When we ask or we talk to you, you guys take it to heart and you really, really listen. And you don't find that too much, and I want to thank you very, very much for that. You're a tremendous
Well, that's nice of you to
asset
say.
and resource
I
to
appreciate the
community.
partnership very much, and, you know, I think this North End's blessed with good leaders and good governments, and I think we actually do work well together, and that's our job, right? That's our job, so
And we
it's a
appreciate
push.
it.
And as you all know, you don't really have a choice. Mayor Baker knocking on your door regularly.
So, thank you for
Thank you,
coming up here.
thanks, Dave.
Is there anything else that you want, anything else?
Yeah.
Dr.
So
Curtis.
going back to the pool levy, my concern is if we don't have any detail,
Yeah.
is somebody going to study that to say how likely is a levy to pass? Because it just feels like it's less likely to be approved if you don't have here's what we're going to do with this money.
Yeah. So that's a very fair comment, and I think you'd have to have enough parameters to where you could say, well, the money would be put to good use. And obviously, it's a little bit less advanced in terms of the concept than some of the things you're seeing on the sheet that's been handed out, right? The East Side Rail Corridor, those projects are kind of planned. But it's a 6-year levy, and so there's some stuff, you know, that isn't fully baked, I'll say. But I know what's fully baked, and that's the need, right? And I just think, given the communities here in the North End, I know Shoreline they're talking about maybe a ballot measure this fall, right, for their community center pool. So they're in planning and active community discussions right now with a site and a number of lanes and a diving tank or no diving tank. So they're pretty far down. And I know the superintendent of North Shore Schools has been working for a couple of years plus to identify a need. It's a little less advanced, but I think the need is there. With respect to whether it's going to pass, remember, this would just be a small piece of it. I think, and not that you legislate this way, but politically, I think it would be very popular. I think it would actually help it. Garrett has handed me the passage map from the last Parks levy in 2013, and the green is the strongest support. So I'll pass this around, but people love this Parks levy. I mean, I know we're in a period of tax sensitivity, particularly around property tax. But I price it out, and I don't know if there's a lot of $500,000 homes left. I think there's still a fair number in Kenmore, but you know, I know they're getting a little rarer. But at $84 a year, or under $100 a year, you know, $7, $8, $9 a month for this, it is a little bit more. But I think people assign value to it and are willing to make that investment. But I think in the North End, just tell you, the map showing it's a little light, okay? I mean, it's a little light. And part of that is we don't have a lot of county facilities up here. I mean, we have the Burke, we do have the Big Fin Hill Park and Juanita Woodlands, which are close and receive funding from this. A lot of this, remember, is just our regional park system. So Cougar Mountain, out in Snoqualmie, right? If we have folks that go out there and bike or hike or do that, a lot of that's county land that's funded by this program. And the reason we've got the levy, it's important to remember, is the county almost shut down its parks department in the early 90s with the general fund, you know, reduction. And a citizens task force came together, led in part by Bob Wallace from Bellevue, Wallace Projects, and they actually said, no, we think you should stay in business and put the levy forward. So it is our funding. It's quite popular. The other thing it does, and I'll tell you, they've taken a little bit of a compromise on it. Maybe one I wouldn't actually choose, but the executive has had a strong program, which I've sponsored on the legislative side, for a land conservation initiative. I think some of you have heard of it, to preserve the last great 60,000 acres in King County of farmlands and forest lands. And our conservation futures tax today is on your property tax, but because of the increased value and the 1% cap, we don't collect the full amount. We're down by 2.5 cents or so above the full amount, and you'd have to go to the voters on that. The executive elected not to ask the voters to raise the CF conservation futures tax, which is the conservation futures money, which we've used to buy parklands. So this has a little bit of a of a piece in it for the Land Conservation Initiative, but it's a penny and a half short of kind of the full meal deal on that. So there's some kind of squeezing in here to be aware of the concern about tax fatigue. And frankly, I would be all in on that. I don't know where folks are. I would accelerate that because I just believe when they're gone, they're gone. When the lands are gone, they're gone. And it's a relatively affordable price to pay. But that's what the executive's at least talking about. And I'll pass this passage map around. I think our constituents vote for it. And I want to make sure that we get a fair return on the investment. On the other hand, I do think as electeds, the test shouldn't be, well, it's going to pass, so let's put it in, no matter what. Let's jack it up. We've got to have some fiduciary duty to make it reasonable in terms of the burden.
We have an audience here.
Yeah.
And they're waiting for our agenda.
They are.
Go
All right.
ahead.
The
Go
only,
ahead.
I talked about the regional recreational facilities, but I think you all led and your community endorsed it, the Walkways and Waterways bond, right? The first ever bond in the city of Kenmore passed overwhelmingly, very popular. People want to get to the water. Sammamish and Lake Washington, we have this incredible treasure. And there aren't a lot of access points to it. We have the Burke, and I just think that could be another piece of this levy is kind of partnering with our north end cities here on access to the water off the Burke. Because we're bringing folks up, they want to take a little pit stop. Wayne is an example of that. Obviously, you have Log Boom Park, but there may be other opportunities. I know that it's a priority for the city of Kenmore. Over in Lake Forest Park, there's a special site that's for sale. You don't see them too often there that we're looking at, but it always is when you find the sites. How do you get the money? This is the time to put some money in the budget to be able to do these things because something will come up in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years where you all will say, boy, it's too big a bite for us. If we had some regional help, it sure would be nice. That's what we did in Bothell with Wayne. So I just want to have some resources there since our taxpayers are paying into it to be able to support our collective work on that. I think we're going to talk more later about Metro. Are you telling me to stop talking, Dave?
Sort of.
Yeah, 7:08. Sorry. Okay. I'll obviously stay around for that and be available. I know we have Metro folks
Yes,
here.
we will have, yes.
Yeah.
We're going to try and kind of shift the schedule a little bit, but
Okay.
yes.
Very good. Again, I apologize for being late to our meeting. I'm happy to return or to keep working.
We'll
with you all.
schedule another one.
Okay. All right.
You're not getting off the hook so easy.
All right. I understand.
So,
Yeah.
what's that?
Can we briefly mention NPRSA? We don't need to solve the
Oh,
problem
no,
tonight,
yeah,
but
do, NPSRA, yes, please.
yeah, so you're on the board, so is Councilmember Marshall. At their last meeting, they talked about capital needs, one of which is rather emergent when it comes to fire access and things like that. So I think they need about $2.8 million in capital needs for those 2 senior center buildings in Bothell. We're all part of that district, the 3 cities and then the unincorporated counties there. And so how best to finding that capital needs, does it make sense for that district to stay in existence forever or should it be dissolved? Those are all questions that Bothell and Kenmore are asking.
I guess on that, I do serve on that, and Matt's been on it as well. And I would follow the city's lead, to be honest with you. It was, I know, formed really around the senior center, and but at some point, that senior center coming up 20 years old, 25 years, it's going to need some capital infusion, and the bonds are going to be paid off sooner rather than later. Kenmore, I think, as you all know, it's a great regional facility over there, and Kenmore has the little one in Rhododendron Park, but it's a little light, right? Of course, it has the authority to, and there was a study done for a swimming pool as well. So, I'm open to and want to be supportive of whatever, frankly, the cities in the district decide is the best approach. It's not easy to set up a taxing district when you have it, and sometimes voters like the special purpose district. They know what the money's going for, and it's focused on that. And if there's an efficient government, that is one. I mean, it's very lean, right, and very understaffed. Yeah. So,
All right. Let's take 5 minutes or so, and we will reconvene the regular council meeting.
all right. Thank you all very much.
So we're coming out of that discussion with Councilmember Dembowski's office, and we are going to go into our regular session. So let's, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Danuski?
Here.
Councilmember Curtis?
Present?
Councilmember Marshall?
Present.
Councilmember Shrevenick?
Here.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Here.
If we could please stand and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance All right. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda, but I'd like to offer a couple of changes here. And so one, we've got people here that are interested in a couple of the things on the agenda, and they have been here all through the dinner meeting. So I would like to move, if possible, if we're in agreement on this, to move walkways and waterways up, and then perhaps the city manager can talk about Lake Point, and then we can pick up the rest of the meeting. So unless there's objections to that, the agenda will stand approved as modified.
So we're still having citizen comment next?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right, so then the changes being that walkways and waterways will go first, and then the city manager's update on Lake Point, and then we will move on with the rest of the agenda. So citizen comments. This is an opportunity for you to express your views on issues that are important to you and to the community. We ask that you please limit your comments to 3 minutes. I'm not used to the audience so far back. It's looked like we have this barrier here to protect them from us.
You're right. You're correct, Mayor. It's not usually set up like this. I apologize.
Well, it's not. Okay, so citizen comments. Clerk, please call the first person.
Eric Admin?
Hi there. Eric Admin, 7815 Northeast 192nd Street, Kenmore, Washington. As many of you probably know, I'm the president of a nonprofit organization that works on behalf of local streams called Snow King Watershed Council. And I just wanted to highlight and say thank you one more time to Councilmember Rod Dembowski. Currently, we're operating under a grant from the King County Waterworks program, which is allowing us to have a citizen-based volunteer water quality monitoring program. So we're training citizens to go out, monitor their local streams, become stewards of their local streams, and that's our current funding stream is the King County Waterworks grant. So thank you, Councilmember Dembowski.
Thank you, Mr. Admin. Appreciate it.
Douglas?
My name is Doug Morud. I live at 19401 68th Avenue Northeast, Kenmore, Washington. Been a resident of Kenmore for 30 years. The Walkways and Waterways project that's been proposed goes along in front of my house. I have put a lot of time and effort into the front of my house to allow for additional parking, safety features that our whole neighborhood of 8 houses benefits from. I would like the city council to take into consideration the proposals that have been put forward regarding our properties and try and work with us the best they can to come to a mutual beneficial solution for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Hendrickson?
evening, council members. John Hendrickson, Kenmore, Washington. I was on the city council for 8 years, and during that time, I found it very hard for the city or the council to ever own up to a mistake, saving face or for whatever reason, and it would hurt people. Example like the Jim Crone case, or the fact that we've been paying road taxes every year. It's up to over 90 million since incorporation, and the council says we never pay road taxes, things like that. At the retreat 3 weeks ago, I think there was a dramatic mistake that the council needs to address openly and publicly. On Saturday morning, while discussing Lake Point, Councilmember Brent Smith proposed to terminate the non-conforming use zoning at Lake Point. And he wanted to do it because he said it provides an income stream to the owner of Lake Point that we cannot compete with. His assessed value is $6.9 million, and his cash flow is more than $6.9 million. And, I mean, I'm surprised no one even responded to that, to say that we would want to change the zoning for the purpose of reducing an income stream for a local business, for the purpose of reducing the assessed value of that business, so then we could look at buying it. You know, inviting a lawsuit. So actually, the assessed value of that property was 6.4 last year. It's $6,080,000 this year. And they have, King County assesses at the highest, best possible use. And historically, they've appealed their assessment 6 or 7 times. So they're very cognizant of what their value is. They work with the county. And I would think that's a good value. This proposal, well, invites a lawsuit, especially if you think of using eminent domain, which you should. You know, I think that the owner is very unrealistic about the value of that property, and we should pursue it. But you have to separate yourself first from these comments from Councilmember Smith. Okay, he has a history of things, of kind of outrageous comments like this. For example, for the St. Ed's ball field, he had a lobbyist threaten state parks. The city would withhold our permits for the hotel if they didn't give us the ball field, right? Constitutional violation. So we could have used eminent domain to buy the Bastyr property. You know how much that would have cost? Around $9.8 million. I wanted to do it when I was on the council, but I didn't do it in a sneaky way. I was open in a public meeting. You know, we should do that. But you have to take steps and go back and look at how we changed the zoning on that property around 2011 so that WashDOT could use it for the 520 project. That increased his cash flow, a big benefit, all right? We need to change that back, not because we want to do what Brent Smith says, but because that was our old zoning. It's the right thing to do.
Mr. Hendrickson, we're at 3 minutes.
Do it the right way, but separate us and protect us from that bad proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrickson.
Cindy French?
Hello, I'm Cindy Kesey French. I live at 5600 Northeast 190th Street. And I'm also the artistic director of our new local theater. Oh, I like, yeah, applause. That's what, As If Theater Company. We are just starting right at the Kenmore Community Club. We are very excited. I moved to Kenmore when I was 4 years old. I actually went to high school with Deborah. We found out later. Moved back again to raise my family. And when my fellow leaders of this company were looking at where we could start a theater company, I thought Kenmore, because you've got nothing until Woodinville and you've got nothing until Edmonds. And we're facing this revitalization, and nothing could be more exciting than being able to offer engaging, entertaining, and high-quality theater to, I think, a public that needs it. So I'm now introducing you to Amy Gentry, who is our managing director, and later will be followed by Molly Hall, our engagement director, and then we'll give you a little song about Kenmore. Thank
Thank you so much for having us. We're so thrilled to be here. Like Cindy said, I'm Amy Gentry. I am the managing director and an actor with As If Theater Company. Our first show actually opens on February 8th and runs until the 24th, and it is Sarah Rules, The Clean House. Our tagline for The Clean House is "A good joke cleans your insides out." And it's really about life is hard, life is messy, and we all really just need to laugh to come together. It is funny and heartbreaking and all of the things that makes life wonderful. So we are thrilled. It runs, like I said, at KCC, February 8th through the 24th. We will leave some flyers and some good stuff around, but I'll let Molly tell you what we've got going with the community.
Yeah, so we just wanted to know, hopefully you've all received your invitation to come to our opening night on February 8th and our opening night party. We hope you'll all take us up on that. We hope the community will join us too. You can find information on our website, asiftheater.com. And we are just looking for ways to be more integrated in the Kenmore community. We want to be a part of it. We want to enrich it, and we want to know what kinds of artistic, theatrical things the theater community would like to see. So we have more events coming up soon. We're already partnering with some local businesses and hoping to do more of that. Speaking of arts, here's a song.
Okay, we were inspired by our town. Yeah, that's ready.
We're driving around in the car with the kids, and we made up this song.
In Kenmore, courtesy's contagious. That's the motto that we live by, that's our creed. Please and thank you is our rule, and politeness is our tool to satisfy your every need. Kenmore, Kenmore, in Kenmore, courtesy's contagious. Thank you. Oh, you're
Is that it?
King County
No, there's
didn't
more.
have that, but they're meeting today.
Sarah, you're up next. We expect a song. Just kidding.
I used to have a girlfriend known as Elsie. Oh, come on. Sarah Hayashi, 14615 81st Avenue Northeast. I'm on behalf of the Arts of Kenmore and the Shoup and Paulson families. Just wanted to give you guys a little showcase of, actually I just wanted to say, what an awesome night. So far 3 local nonprofits, so our city is really doing great. At any rate, yeah, the Legends Bench in memory of Sarah Paulson and Caleb Shoup. I gave you each a little flyer, mini flyer. Karen, actually quite a few local businesses are supporting us, and Karen is having a pint night on the 13th. Yeah, this will be an installation over at Rhodey Park. You can kind of see with the shelter there about where it's going to be in between the 2 playgrounds, and oriented so that people can sit on and face either way, face the trees or face the playgrounds. It is meant and very deliberately designed to be a community gathering place. Yeah. Are there any questions? Did I have anything else? Minute and a half left. Do you have any questions?
I'm not a City of Kenmore person anymore, but I was. Carissa Webster. I lived at 15325 75th Northeast Kenmore. Now I'm in Snohomish. But I wanted to warmly invite you to come join us at the Pint Night on February the 13th. It's been an absolute joy building this bench, and Caleb and Sarah were both huge community proponent types of people. Even though they were super young, they were all about their community and taking care of their community, and we really wanted the bench to represent that. We all love Kenmore, and we've, built our own wonderful community here, and we really wanted the bench to represent that and to be a spot for everyone in the community to come and hang out. And so Pint Night is going to be super fun. It's our first official big community event fundraiser to help us pay for the bench. And we have a GoFundMe going, Legends Bench, and the information is on all the flyers. And Sarah's going to leave these at the front. And that's all.
Yeah, I'll
Thanks.
leave flyers for everybody else up at the table. And last, just want to really thank the city for your supporting the Arts of Kenmore, supporting these public art projects and installations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Charnel?
Hi, I'm Charnel Morrood. I live at 19401 68th Avenue Northeast. I don't have a song, so mine's going to be a little bit boring. But I'm here in regards to the 68th Avenue Northeast Walkway and Waterway Plan. There's 3 homeowners on 68th Avenue that are, specifically going to be severely impacted with our driveways, and some of the surrounding neighbors not quite so much of an impact, but still one there. We've been trying to work with the city in good faith to find compromises with both the grades to our driveways and retaining a small parking area, which is on the right-of-way. That parking area was authorized by King County over 30 years ago, and we've maintained it all this time. In trying to compromise, we've agreed to allowing our driveways to be changed, but understand that the city is still leaning to eliminating the parking and choosing option 2 is the current preference. Late last week, we submitted an option 5 that retains the parking but would relocate it. We felt that that might be something that would save some funding but keep this community amenity. We just feel really strongly that that's not something that can be lost, that the parking strip is really an important piece there on the narrowest portion of 68th Avenue Northeast, because there's no other place a car can reasonably and safely pull over between the church and the turn to where you would go to Kenmore Junior High. That strip has kind of been it for a lot of people. Aside from it being a good amenity for the community, though, we need it for inclement weather and things when we actually physically can't get up and down our driveway. And so, unbeknownst to us, over 30 years ago when we put that in, we never dreamed how much use that strip would get, but the reality is that a lot of different neighbors use it. Deliveries are done there. It keeps those big trucks safely off of 68th Avenue. And so we found going through this process that there's a lot of really good reasons to reconsider and keep that parking strip. So we are looking forward to some more conversation here in a little while. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marood. Anybody else?
Kirk?
Hi, Kirk Fulmer, also a resident of the 68th Avenue Northeast on the project here that we've been discussing. I just wanted to also support of what we've been talking about. We've been working with the city planner for the past year and trying to discuss ways of making the layout work for all of us. And we've had discussion with folks at the house or on our properties. And we're here tonight to continue that discussion of the options in our maintaining our parking strip that's been important to us for over 30 years and has been noted here by Charnel. Like I said, it was approved by the county back then as well. As a community, we use this parking strip regularly, and as a big amenity, we wish not to lose. We hope that the city and the council will meet us at least halfway and keep our safety parking area that benefits several households. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is nobody else signed up, Mayor.
Anybody else wishing to be heard? Yes. Mr. Banks, absolutely. You're going to have to sign up when you're done.
I will do that. Roger that.
And I know where to find you.
I just, it was exciting to hear Councilmember Dembowski reference, I think he used regional recreational facility and Lake Point in the same sentence. And I just got to say, that would be a very exciting vision, I think. And if there's a way to have a discussion about that, I think the community would be ecstatic about that kind of a vision, so.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Anyone else? Thank you all for taking time out of your busy lives to be here tonight. We appreciate it. And for those of you speaking up, we appreciate that. We can't operate in a vacuum. We need to know your opinions, and we're glad that you're here. Mr. Admin, thank you for your involvement and that in the community. And I don't know if you know, but we do have water quality monitors now up and running that are accessed on the web under our surface water program on the city website. That's been a long time coming, but I am very, very pleased with the results, and we'll soon have dashboards and everything else where we can really make use of that historical data that we've been lacking for so long. So thank you for your work in the community. Mr. Marood, Mrs. Marood, and Kirk, thank you guys very much for your comments. We will be discussing that tonight, so stay tuned. Mr. Hendrickson, thank you very much for your comments. Well, Cindy French and her group have left, but I don't care. I certainly am happy to welcome them to the city. I am very pleased to see the arts expanding here in Kenmore to include performance art, and I'm looking forward to Clean House and seeing what they have to offer. I hope you guys are able to join us. With that, thank you all again for your comments. And next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further
Mayor,
discussion?
Councilmember
Yes?
Danuski, were you the first?
Yes.
Yes,
Pardon?
thank you. Thank you. I just didn't catch the first on that motion.
Oh, okay.
So I apologize.
Fine. Okay, so if there is no further discussion, all those in favor of passing the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda stands approved unanimously. All right, we're shuffling things around.
Mayor, unfortunately, I just need to make a note. Kent Vaughn is not here quite yet. He should be here momentarily to do the staff presentation on the Walkways and Waterways 68th Avenue.
Good. If we can do that, we will go to the city manager and we'll hear about the Lake Point
Okay,
update.
thanks.
So you have a memo in your packet, talks about Lake Point. Pretty self-explanatory in the memo. We received a letter last November from the developer suspending negotiations. Since then, we've been in sporadic conversations with the attempt to bring them back to the table. They still haven't come back to the table, but we did get a letter from the developer that's also attached in the council bill, talking about some feedback that they're providing on the parameter agreement. So we'll continue to talking with the developer on the parameter agreement. Don't know how much further we'll get. I think the goal is to come up with a reduced, more condensed parameter agreement, but not sure if the developer will entertain it or not, but we're going to give it a shot.
Councilmember Smith?
I appreciate the city manager's efforts in trying to hold this together. I just would like to express the fact that we provided them with a parameter agreement, and I believe if the developer wants to proceed, he should, on a nearly billion-dollar project, I think it would behoove him to provide a counter to the parameter agreement rather than us providing, countering ourselves. And if we have to drag him to the table to negotiate, I don't think we have a party that is equally motivated. And so I feel like that's something that needs to be recognized here, is that we fulfilled our end of what we said we were going to do, and on their end, he's saying, I don't want to proceed. And so I feel like if he doesn't want to proceed, I don't feel like we should try to bring him on board and find out 2 years down the road that, yes, that lack of motivation, or whatever you want to call it, is genuine. And then we're just going to be back where we are today. And so I just feel like that's something that's worth noting.
Anybody else? Oh, Councilmember Marshall.
I strongly support Councilmember Smith in that viewpoint.
Councilmember Danuski.
Actually, I think it's a good idea for us to relook at the parameter agreement. We got some feedback, and it may not have been a direct counter, but it was some feedback that, we could take to heart and see if we can trim things down a little and see if anything happens.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yeah, I concur with Councilmember Danuski, and it wouldn't necessarily be directed to Mr. Widener. I think relooking at the parameter agreement with whomever we want to end up partnering with would be prudent. I think he's, he had some good feedback, and I think we should at least take a go at it.
City Manager.
So at the retreat, we talked about a Plan A and a Plan B. Plan A is still try to do a deal with Widener. Plan B is go through a RFP process. The direction I got at the retreat was still try for Plan A, and if Plan A doesn't work, then go to Plan B. So that's the direction I'm following. You've directed me to still try to do a deal with Widener, so that's what I'm going to try to do. Whether it's him producing a parameter agreement or us, it's not always as simple as that. What happens is you start talking and you negotiate, and it goes back and forth, and before you know it, you don't know who brought up what and who proposed what, because it's all part of the discussion. So if we came up with something, it would probably be something that the city manager and Mr. Widener mutually were okay with bringing forward for your approval.
Councilmember Smith.
Well, I would just add that Mr. Widener specifically said 2 feet from me that he wasn't interested in proceeding with this. And so I consider it to be a waste of time negotiating with somebody that tells me he doesn't want to negotiate.
I'm happy to follow council's direction. If you don't want me to pursue Plan A, then I won't. Based on his letter that he gave us, there is, looks like there's a little bit of a crack in the door. And if you want me to pursue that crack in the door, I will. But if you don't, then I won't.
Councilmember Smith.
Well, I would move that we do not proceed with a new parameter agreement since we already created one. And and I'd make a motion that the city manager not provide a parameter agreement if the developer wants a parameter agreement, then he can provide one for us to review.
So the motion, is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this? Councilmember Shrubnik.
I think doing a parameter agreement, a revision to it, can serve option A and option B, or Plan A and Plan B. I mean, we would need to do it for either one, so I don't see that it would be a wasted effort. We could kind of see what his response is. We can always decide if it happened to be positive, which is unlikely, that we could choose whether to proceed or not at that point. So I guess I don't see any cost to kind of going through the process as we outlined it at the retreat.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'm going to reverse kind of what I said last week when we were talking on the phone, Brent. But I actually think because we're so close to the end of Widener's purchase and sale anyway, that comes up, I think, next month at some point. Things are either going to live or die in the next 3 or 4 weeks, so I don't see any harm in continuing talking at this point. It's not going to be a ton of staff time. It's just 3 or 4 weeks worth of work, and with everything we put into it, it can't hurt to take one last small swing, and I don't hold a lot of optimism that we'll get something out of it, but I don't see a whole lot of harm in continuing what we started in what we directed in January.
Councilmember Curtis.
So Lake Point, when it was originally planned by King County, was a big project controlled by somebody before we existed, and it had a lot of restrictions and that made it very complicated to develop this property. So I think at the very least, for us to think about, if those didn't exist, what's our bare minimum? What would we like to see Lake Point develop into? And that's what I see the parameter agreement doing. So to at least proceed that step, I think is worth the while.
Councilmember Smith?
Well, so those are two separate issues, because we talked extensively about what another process would be, which would be to define what we as a community want and work towards a mutual understanding of what could happen on that site with a willing property owner that wants to have that discussion. So I see that very different, because in our initial parameter agreement, we discussed significantly about what we wanted, and that's what the developer found unacceptable. And so if it's going to be a skinny down parameter agreement, we will get something that is significantly less than that original document. And let's just put yourself in the developer's shoes. If you're a month and a half away from that, you would want to be at the table with the city to get this resolved. My only point is that if we have to drag him to a negotiation and we have to hang on by a thread, that isn't a partner that is highly motivated to fulfill a transaction. And that's where I'm looking down the road as much as I'm looking at the next month and a half, is that what we want to do is we want a long-term commitment with a willing party that sees the value to them as well as to the community. And I don't see that that's where this is going.
Is there any more discussion?
I think you're going to find any developer that we decide to work with is going to be super hard to work with, especially on a big, hairy project like this. I've never worked with a developer that's easy to work with, and they always come across as non-committal, and they always screw around with you for as long as they can. So if we didn't go with Widener and did an RFP, the next developer will be just as difficult, if not more so.
Councilmember Smith?
So, well, that gets to the retreat discussion. What we talked about is, I agree with you completely. And it's because of that, that if we define it, look, we know the property owner is highly motivated to see this transaction through. So there's no, of course, the attorney's letter coming from the property owner wants to see this happen, because he's got a financial interest in seeing it happen. I would do everything I could too if I had a $40+ million PSA on the line. My point is that I don't think the developer wants to do it. So let's start looking ahead. Let's start working with the property owner about removing or reevaluating the P suffixes, and so that we can make it more developable. But we can develop it and we can have a win-win, both from a financial feasibility standpoint for them as well as from a community benefit for us. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. It's just you have to have parties that want to get there. And Widener has not shown, based on the last two letters, that he wants to get there, or verbally.
All right, any further discussion? Deputy Mayor.
And I would argue that that what Councilmember Smith just spelled out, talking about P suffixes and how we address that, is all things we can do in 6 weeks after, if the purchase and sale goes away and we're back to square one. I don't see any harm in putting that off for a few weeks while we let this play out.
All right. Anything new? Hearing none, the motion before us is to stop communicating.
No, actually, let me clarify. If I wasn't clear, I probably wasn't clear on the motion. The motion would be for us not to provide a revised parameter agreement.
Okay, fine. So the motion then before us is for us not to provide a revised parameter agreement, to stop working on the parameter agreement.
Mayor, what was the last piece of what you just said? And stop working on the parameter agreement?
Their agreement with Widener. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
No.
Councilmember Curtis?
No.
Mayor Baker?
No.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
No.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
No.
Failed.
Motion passes 5-2.
5.
All right. Well, Kent, do we know? He's just probably being Hank's dad. So we'll go to the next item on the agenda until he comes. Let's go with King County Metro and the parking permit program. Tristan Cook. Yeah, please.
Good evening, Mayor Baker and members of the City Council. Tonight it's my pleasure to introduce Tristan Cook with King County and Councilmember Dembowski. Mr. Cook is here to provide information and take comments on some aspects of Metro's single occupant vehicle or SOV paid parking permit program, that's a tongue twister, at the Park and Ride. So Tristan is a transportation planner in Metro's Connecting to Transit group, and that group focuses on getting people to transit through parking, walking, biking, and other solutions. He's the lead on the implementation work for the SOV permit program. So tonight's goal is for the council to give staff direction on providing comments to Metro, and the deadline for those comments is February 18th. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tristan.
Good evening, and thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight to talk to you about King County Metro's paid parking permit program that we are working towards implementation on, and appreciate the introduction. Tonight I want to talk a little bit about give a little bit of context and background about the program and some of our regional and what was included in that ordinance, and that is leading us to develop the SOV, single occupant vehicle program that we're developing, and provide an overview about that. And then get a little bit more specific about the public rule that we're developing right now, which is what we are taking public comment on through February 18th right now. And so I'll talk a little bit about what specifically is covered in that public rule, and then finish up with some next steps that we're planning. So for a little bit of background and context, there are about 130 park and ride facilities where customers can access Metro service. That equals to a total of about 26,000 parking stalls throughout the county. Many locations, as many of you may be already aware, fill up very early in the morning. They're very popular, and it makes it really difficult for people to access transit at these facilities within their community. It also leads to overcrowded buses very early in the morning, and then underutilized service later on in the morning peak. Metro Connects, our long-range plan, sets out a vision for how customers will access transit in the future. That calls for parking that's more efficient and actively managed, increasing our parking supply through low-cost solutions, and then a longer-term expansion of parking supply. It also asks us to look for better first and last mile connections, including bike and walk, as well as new mobility services. We've been working with our regional partners through a PSRC convened working group around parking and parking management. We have been coordinating very closely with Sound Transit as well. In 2017, we launched a carpool permit program, which provides a reserved parking space at some of our busiest park and rides. This has been implemented at 24 different locations throughout the county or throughout the region. It reserves a space for carpool permit holders. They do have to use transit at least 3 times a week on average, so we're checking that through ORCA verification. And that space is reserved for them up until 8:30 in the morning, after which point that space opens up for first come, first served parking at that location. So that program was launched in 2017 and continues. And we've also been working with Sound Transit. About a year ago, we did some extensive public outreach about a single occupant parking permit program, paid parking permits. The outcome from that outreach is what helped Metro to develop an ordinance that was submitted to King County Council and was approved in November. An ordinance was approved in November that authorizes King County Council or authorizes King County Metro to implement paid parking permits. It also establishes our goals for parking management. It calls for reduced rates for ORCA Lift cardholders or low-income ORCA Lift cardholders. It provides enforcement authority and establishes some limits around enforcement. It also restricts revenue to support program costs and access to transit improvements. The single occupant vehicle program that we're developing, want to give kind of an overview of how that would work, very similar to the carpool permit program that's already in place. It would be implemented at Metro-owned and operated lots with an average weekday utilization of 90% or higher, so those really high, very popular, high-demand locations. Up to 50% of stalls would be reserved for permit holders up until a certain time in the morning peak. So the other 50% would be continued to be first come, first serve, as they are today. Permit holders must ride transit on average 3 times a week to maintain their permit. And additional program details such as the permit fees, how we administer permits, and enforcement are described in the public rule that we're taking comment on right now. So I'll give a little bit of detail about what's in the public rule, and it's a fairly long document, so there's quite a bit of information in it, so I'm kind of hitting the high notes here. But for permit fees, they're based on a $90 average market price for paid parking in King County, for monthly paid parking. So for most of the 10 locations that we're looking at, there would be a $90 a month permit fee. There would be a $20 monthly permit fee for ORCA Lift, low-income ORCA Lift eligible customers, and carpool permits would continue to be free as they are today. The public rule also establishes how we would handle waiting lists, which would be established according to sort of the chronological order that people applied for permits at any given location. The one exception is that we're proposing a 10% ORCA Lift target that would prioritize anyone who's been verified as eligible for ORCA Lift, that they would go kind of to the front of the line in terms of getting the next permit if there were a waiting list type situation. And finally, the public rule also identifies the fees for our citations and how we go about enforcing the rules around the permits. So it's a we're proposing a $20 fine for the first 3 citations. The 4th citation would be a $20 fine plus a tow. And then we wouldn't send anything to collections until we hit a $300 minimum debt. So, and then the public rule also kind of establishes how one would maintain their permit through ORCA or through transit ridership and by our verification that they are indeed riding transit at least 12 times a month. And then some certain exceptions for the rules, like if they had medical reasons or were on vacation or something and couldn't meet that minimum, that there are some exceptions to that rule that we would allow for like 1 time per year. So that's kind of an overview of the program, the public rule. The next steps that we're looking forward to are when we complete the public comment period on February 18th, we'll take that information and revise the public rule based on the comments that we're receiving. We're then going to be developing some reports to take back to County Council to describe the results of that comment period, as well as a report that covers how we will be using revenue from the permit program. And when that goes through council, and if it's approved, then we would move forward with selling permits. And right now, we're targeting June as the first month where we might, as the earliest month where we might potentially be selling permits, and July as would be the first month, if that were the case, where people would be parking at Park and Rides with single occupant vehicle permits. So, thank you.
Questions? Councilmember Curtis.
Thank you for coming and giving the presentation. So in our information pack, it says the benefits of managing our parking: customer experience, equity, operational efficiency, fiscal responsibility. So I have two questions. I understand customer experience. We all want to make people happy, so they use whatever goods or services we're offering. Operational efficiency makes sense. You're spreading people out so they don't all end up trying to get to one bus and then the rest are unused. The fiscal responsibility makes sense. I don't understand the equity part.
Okay.
If the parking lot's 95% full, how does arranging how the first group gets in there create extra parking for shift workers or non-traditional schedule?
So we're really designing the program to add, as you mentioned, sort of certainty for people, flexibility for people. Right now, if you don't get to a park and ride by 7:30 or 8 in the morning, you're not going to find a parking space, and that facility is no longer a useful way for you to connect to transit service. And there are people that may, if you have obligations in the morning, like dropping your child off at daycare or school, and you aren't going to be able to make it to the park and ride by 8 a.m., you may be taking on the additional cost burden of driving to work and paying for parking, which might be much more expensive. We also, if you have a schedule, your work schedule doesn't have much flexibility in the time, or your shift starts later in the morning, that this would provide more flexibility for you to show up, park your car, and access transit later in the morning and have that certainty that you would be able to use transit service to get to work.
Okay, but somebody who starts at noon, this program wouldn't help them at all because all the spots are released by 9 or whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, it will depend on when we end the permit, when the permit ends. So if it were to end at like 10 a.m., then that might be a little early for someone whose shift starts at noon, but it does provide a little bit more flexibility. It's from like say 10 or 7:30 in the morning, which is when most people, many of our park and rides fill up, to say 10 a.m.
Okay. The second question relates to, I see the bigger question, and that's really capacity. So if the lot's 95% full, all the shuffling doesn't solve that problem. It smooths some things out, how the buses fill, but only a certain number of cars can park in that lot.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's, we have the carpool permit program is one way that we're really trying to improve access. We're looking at a lot of different ways to improve access to transit. The carpool permit program is a way to encourage more people to arrive at our park and rides together. We're looking at bike and walking access to these locations, as well as outlined in Metro Connects, as well as new mobility services, and looking at ways that we can invest in our services as ways to get people, expanding our services as a way to get people to connect to kind of the transit spine as well. So you're right, it won't increase the number of stalls, but it's a way to manage the parking stalls that we do have in a way to provide more flexibility and equitability, and encourage people to try to find ways to connect to transit as well through carpool permits also. So.
Now with ST3, if we get 300 more parking stalls, do you think they'll fill up 95% as well and we'll have the same issue?
Yeah, we'll have to see how that goes, yeah.
Or we'll have so much capacity we won't be on this special program anymore?
It's, yeah, I mean, we would not be using the program if there was no longer that much demand for it.
Okay.
So that's a really good question. We'll wait and see.
Deputy Mayor.
Couple of questions. So I think you've alluded to this, but I'd just like to kind of hear it said straight up. What is kind of King County's hoped for outcome from the program, and how are you going to measure success or failure?
Yeah, so this is, King County Metro has kind of a longer range vision for managed parking. Is your question related to sort of managed parking or just sort of like access to transit in
Well,
general?
as far as this program goes, the permitting, how are you going to measure, what's going to be success for Metro, what's going to be failure, what is your outcome that you're really aiming for with it?
Right. So I think the outcome will be based a lot on what we hear from our customers in terms of their ability to improved ability to access transit, their satisfaction with the program as well. We'll be looking at, one issue that we have is people who use our park and ride facilities that are not actually accessing transit. So this is one way where we can better manage those facilities and make sure that they are in fact being used to access transit. So if we can better crack down on some of that behavior and through permitting, that will be one outcome that we're looking for as well. Overall, we're just looking for a way to better improve people's access and that there's customer satisfaction in that sense.
Okay, and when you were answering Councilmember Curtis there, you mentioned increasing bike access, and that actually, I know that we have some bike lockers down at our parking right now, and they're completely full from what I understand. And is there any thought of using some of the revenue towards, you talk about increasing bike access, could we get more bike lockers installed?
It's definitely one of the things we would want to be looking at is options like that where we could help provide more ways for people to access. So if the bike lockers are full and that's means that someone who might otherwise ride a bike instead of drive, then we want to look at improvements like that would help increase that more people would have the ability to get into transit at this facility. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
I know that Sound Transit looked at this last summer, but I just never heard $90 a month fee.
Okay.
I certainly appreciate the fact that seniors and those on the Yorka Lift cards in need will get it for $20, and I do appreciate that. But my goodness, 90 is really high.
And that is a number where we would, again, adjust as needed. It's based on our best information that we have in terms of what is kind of the market rate and market average. If demand is really low, we would be adjusting it lower. So that's something that we would consider in the future as well.
I mean, I'm certainly not suggesting that people that ride the bus are on lower paying jobs, but I know there's a number of people working in for $15 an hour and under. That this is going to be a tremendous cost burden on them, even though they don't qualify for a subsidized Orca cards. It's still going to be tough for them, especially the ones that are getting there at, let's say, 7 o'clock in order to get a parking spot. Now we've sold part of the parking spots. Those are no longer available. And who knows, we may have that parking lot filling up at 6:30, 6:45. So I guess, I would hope some more consideration would be given to that.
Sure, okay.
That fee.
Thank you.
Councilmember Danuski.
So if part of the goal is to spread out the users, did you look at just making some of the parking lot be kind of a timed parking lot where, 7:30 a.m. on this part of the parking lot opens up? Something like that?
That's a good question, and I don't think that was something that we looked at least that I'm aware of that we looked at. So certain area would be for a certain time in the morning versus, okay.
If you're worried about everything filling up before 7:30 a.m., just maybe have part of the parking lot
Right.
not in use until 7:30 a.m. or later.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. I guess my initial thought is that it might be frustrating for people who are trying to get to work to see open spots sitting there, but
You may have that with a permit too. They may not be there, so you'd have that same frustration.
Right, yep. But then the permit does open up after the time in the morning where it would become available. But that is a good
Or maybe just a
consideration.
delayed start section of the parking lot. I don't know. Just a thought. So one thing I heard, I don't often take the bus, but I had to take the bus last Friday, so I had a fun conversation on this. And quite a few people, everybody's going to work. Quite a few people say at $90 a month, they would just drive in because it's economical for them to take the bus, but time-wise, it's taking them longer. So, up at $90 a month, they're pretty much at the point where they just say, all right, I got to buy a permit at work and I'll just drive. So that's also
Okay.
something to consider.
Well, that's,
And it was a lot of people who had that comment. It wasn't like it was just, well, I'm going to have to switch then because
Okay.
now the speed wins out over the money options, so.
okay, that's
Something
good
to-
feedback. I mean, from the cost analysis that we looked at, it was, a downtown parking monthly permit is going to average you about $300 a month, plus just the cost of driving downtown, fuel and maintenance and whatnot. So I think we were looking at that, but I think that's a good comment that if people can
Yeah,
add
and that
in
might
the
have just
factor
been
of time.
gut feel commenting, but
Yep.
that was, quite the rowdy group
Okay.
there that had that comment, so there you go.
Thanks.
Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, my biggest concern was the $90. I just thought that seems, because it is so close to that point where everybody's going to have that point where you take the bus and now you're driving. And $90, if you think about it, that's $1,000 a year. So for somebody making, say, $50,000 a year, that's 2% of their gross income right there, just to park in the park and ride.
Well, and if that was your income, that you would be eligible to get a $20 a month
Okay,
permit. Yeah.
so, 75,000 then, that's still, I mean, I guess my point is,
Yeah, I hear your point.
it's a significant amount, and I think it's too significant. And my fear is that once you get it in there, then all of a sudden, it's going to be easy to then go, now we're going to do 3/4 of the spaces, and now we're going to do 100% because we think it's been effective. Well, we don't really know, is it effective because people are making it effective, or are they driving, which is totally defeating the purpose. And so it's really hard to be able to gauge it. But I would just say I think the cost could be burdensome for a lot of people.
Good feedback, thank you.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Well, I have a kind of a statement that I'd like to read into the record. And first, I just want to thank you for coming out and taking the time to tell us about this. The documentation was excellent. And, I appreciate the attempt to resolve multiple issues. You've got budget issues, you've got overcrowding issues. There's a lot going on there. And, trying to provide some relief for the proposed fees for the Orca Lift eligible residents. It should ideally be free, but you did provide some relief. But I am personally opposed to the paid parking concept in general, SOV or not, for the following reasons, and I'll ask if other council members are supportive of this statement later. So first, charging a fee for park and ride use, I feel, is the wrong solution to excess demand, just conceptually. Excess demand to a facility like this it's a good problem to have. We want that. We want people to want to ride transit. Charging people is a disincentive to ridership, which hurts everyone and our environment. It puts more cars on the road. And the level of fee, as many of my fellow council members have said, is excessive. At $90 a month, plus the $110 to $150 for your bus pass, you're very close to your $300 a month for parking downtown. And at that point, people are going to choose to simply drive. I mean, there's just no comparison. The convenience of having your car, it might take a little longer or a little more time or less time than a bus. It's going to be pretty close, but you're definitely going to see more cars on the road. And again, that's obviously not a desirable outcome. The proposed fee will also lead to the average transit demographic in those park and rides to be wealthier due to half of them paying this SOV permit, and that's going to be obviously a wealthier demographic. And that's, to me, a clear equity issue. So I just, on the face of it, have a problem with that. In addition, people will attempt to avoid the fee by parking on and clogging our local roads. I think that's going to be a problem. I don't have evidence yet, but I imagine that will happen. Kenmore has also recently lost at least part of our Route 234, which was a last mile solution. We did get some of it. We kind of argued back for it. But, that in and of itself means that more people are trying to get to the park and ride and have to drive rather than taking the bus or shuttle bus. In addition, of course, quite a while ago, we lost over 100 park and ride stalls when the Main Street property was developed across the street here. So the need for additional capacity in our community and park and rides, we've known about this for many years. So, there was a lot of opportunity to provide some increased capacity, and of course now we're at kind of a crisis point. But I feel like a better solution to excess demand is to simply have more capacity. And I know that you're shooting for that in the long run. I still think there's got to be some more solutions for that in the short run, in addition to more last mile shuttles and other solutions for the last mile. So toward these aims, a better funding path, and again, my opinion, than a user fee is a general tax, and you are a taxing authority. Because really everyone benefits from having more transit riders and less cars on the road. It's not just a user fee issue. In addition, a substantial proportion of the stalls could be, this is another idea from the community, could be reserved for our local residents. That could reduce crowding. We know that a lot of our park and ride is taken up by people who don't live here, trying to get to 522. So that's a thought. If the permit fee has already been set in motion, and I kind of got mixed signals of that. It sounds like you are taking comment, which is great. I kind of heard back and forth on that. Ideally, the proceeds would be dedicated solely for increased capacity of park and rides. And it sounds like maybe it's going to general operations. Really, if the problem is capacity of park and rides, it'd be nice to see that those fees are going to solve that problem. Yeah, so those are my thoughts. These and other concerns and ideas were raised by over 50 residents within a 24-hour period of requesting the input. Not a single response expressed unqualified support for this proposal, and so I trust that Metro will consider these comments.
We will. Thank you.
Councilmember Dembowski, I know you were chair of that committee and you worked on it, and so.
I was in the Regional Transit Committee a few years ago. We worked on access to transit, but this came over from the executive side during our budget process, and I had some, and still have some very significant concerns about it, most of which have been articulated up and down the dais here. And I saw in the Kenmore Neighborhood Facebook group the dialogue there in response to Councilmember Shrevenick's inquiry, which I appreciated. I want to thank Tristan for coming up tonight. You can tell he's well-versed in these things, and we have the #1 transit agency for large municipalities in the country, and this is, guys like him are one of the reasons. He didn't know one of the board of directors was going to be here, did you? So when the proposal came over, I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I ran an amendment which did a number of things. One, rather than just simply approving the program, which is what the executive requested, we set up this process that said you may not proceed until you go out into the affected communities, take public input, which is what's going on here tonight, come back and work the proposed rule. Number two, even after you do that, you cannot proceed until you come back to the county council and we approve what you're going to do. We also laid down some guidelines, one of which was, I was very concerned about the piling on of fines. I'm just kind of done with it. I mean, and so the reason these limits are in there, about $20 per violation and no sending to collections till you hit a threshold and all that, is from some language I wrote, because people are just trying to get through their lives. And, sometimes we just ding them and they're trying to get to work. And I've just tried to dial that back. At some point, you've got to have some enforcement after multiple violations if someone's just, ignoring it. But that was an issue for me. I also put in there the language that restricts the revenue from the program to support access to transit, including infrastructure in the parking lots and technology improvements. So we want to see the plan come back for Metro, what they're going to use it. Rather than just pour the dollars into the general Metro budget, I said, our folks are paying for it if we do it. How are you going to make the access better for them in the communities that are paying for it? Not down in the communities that aren't, but in the communities that are paying for it. That could be more parking spots. That's not the general push because they're hard. Well, we're not going to build them. Structured parking, as y'all know, is 100K, but we might lease some spots or other things. But technology, I specifically called out. I want Metro to have the app when you walk out your front door that you know how many spots are available at which parking rides, so you can go down and get it. Like when you drive into downtown, you see the signs, you know, so many spots in this lot, that lot, for certainty. To a large degree, this program is about certainty for those that are frankly able to afford it. You know, can I buy certainty by buying the pass and getting on transit? You know, with respect to the equity issues, I think they're real. I like that, you know, for Orca Lift, which is twice the federal poverty rate, we'll have the reduced fee. But I don't think, the main argument by those that were more enthusiastic about this than me was folks will pay to have certainty. But it does exclude a number of folks that can't, and I think the pricing that you've identified here tonight is key. By the time you buy the pass and pay the parking right fee, at some point you're just like, I'm going to drive so I can hit the grocery store on the way home. You know, and we don't want to have those unintended consequences. So I'm really going to encourage Metro, and we're going to look at their numbers when they come back. I also raised, Councilmember, the local resident issue. You know, these are King County owned and taxpayer supported facilities. And to the extent we have folks coming in from Snohomish County, which I know we do, and we're looking at this at Northgate as well, is there a way to make sure that those that have paid for them kind of have priority or even exclusivity? Because I think the demand will be good. Bike lockers, again, Councilmember Herbig, an additional access to transit thing that could definitely benefit from this. If it were me, I might do scooters, but I know that's sensitive. There's just a few thoughts, but this dialogue and feedback is important. The council required it. Council member or Mayor Baker, you talked about we talked about Orca Lift, but there is also the regional reduced fare permit for seniors and disabled, and I think we should account for that in terms of qualifying for the discounted pass, not just our Orca Lift folks. So I want to stay for this. I want to share with you my interest in it because I think I had a lot of the same concerns. The transit division is trying to align big picture with Sound Transit and in the region. Be consistent across departments, and that's a lot of the thrust here. I'll just tell you, they weren't too happy with me hanging all these amendments on there because they want to get going, and this is going to be a few months longer. Sound Transit's standing their program up a little earlier, but I say that somewhat facetiously. They worked with us and got this process into place. So it's helpful for me to hear the feedback, to see the dialogue in the community, and I know it is for the Transit Division. They'll take it seriously, and when it comes, you know, we'll see that we can be as responsive as possible. I am, finally, to wrap up, concerned about that overflow, you know, the hide and ride. If folks can't, if we don't price it right, or we take too many spots, will people just go into the neighborhoods and park there? I know you have some parking controls around that, but anyway, I'm here to work with you and our Transit Division to iron these issues out as it goes forward, and know that it can't be implemented until they come back, have answers to the questions, and there's consensus, or at least there's 5 votes that it's better to proceed than not.
Any other? Councilmember Danuski.
So also, you know, if we were going to do this, 50% seems like a lot of the spots. Does it really need to be that high? I would rather see it start out something much smaller, and you don't have open spaces where people haven't bought permits and everybody's mad because there's open spaces. And so that's one thing I think that you should really start very small, maybe in the 25%, and then, you know, see how it goes and see what your waiting list is.
Can I clarify on one thing? I just wanted to clarify that the plan is to adjust and shrink or grow based on the number of permits that were purchased for that month. So we wouldn't just have permitted spots that were not ever going to be used. There wasn't actually the demand to use, but I do take your comment that maybe start a little smaller than 50%.
Yeah, because you're going to be signing these spots.
If we did hit that 50% max.
Yeah, so if you started big and then there's a bunch of empty spots that are all signed, that you can't be there without a permit. Yeah, okay.
Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, first, thanks very much for coming tonight. I appreciate hearing all the information, and it's one thing to read it, but to have your take and you and Rod to be able to answer and respond to things is great. I have a question on you had a list of the park and rides that will have this fee. What percentage of park and rides is that, would you say, as a whole? Just ballpark even.
So we're looking at 10 park and rides right now, and we've got 135 different,
Okay, that's it. Okay.
varying sizes, but
Yeah. So just knowing that, I think it would be really important, since these are the ones that are the urban ones, and you wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't a capacity issue, that I think it's really important that the dollars be pumped back into these communities that would be experiencing this, rather than expanding services in other areas where they're already paying, but they're not. Our people would be paying twice then, once at the taxation end and once at the entry to the park and ride. So that would be appreciated.
Right, and real quickly, are there 10, did you say? 10. My recollection is all those are in the north and northeast and east part of the county. Really, once you head south there, it's not there. So it will not be difficult to target the geographic area to invest the dollars that are received back in. It's not even, and it's not really a lot of money. I mean, overall, it's not a big money maker. It's really a demand management and certainty thing. And I think at some point when we're looking at it, you have to balance, is it worth it for the dollars and administering the program for the benefits that
Thank you for bringing that up, because I was actually going to ask you what percent was the administration aspect of that. But I appreciate that comment about the north end, because that does help. And I remember seeing the list because it was in our agenda package, and it looked like it primarily was north end. And so, if they allocate the funds that doesn't mean though that they would just shift other general funds further south. I mean, that's a net plus, hopefully, that we would have up here to address what is clearly a capacity issue. And so I appreciate those comments.
Anything else? Councilmember Januski?
Have you considered when you start this, if you start this, that it would be maybe a pilot program for a year where you get really good data on how many stalls are open before this starts, and how many permits and how many open spots are permit spots, and just really good data for maybe like a year, where people aren't going to be tied to it for the end of the world if it's clearly not meeting the goals that you're trying to make?
I don't think we'd really necessarily consider it a pilot program. That's definitely something we could consider, though. So.
Anybody else? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. All right. Next item. Let's go to walkways and waterways.
I know, crazy. Funny?
Mr. Vaughn, how's Hank doing? Good. Oh, okay.
Fair enough.
I can't say that you're the only one that experienced that today. Yeah, that mic button up. There you go.
We're there?
Yeah, much better.
Brand new, all right. November 2017, staff recommended and council approved a reduced roadway section north of 190th Street. The section removed the landscaping between the sidewalk and curb and removed the buffers for the bike lanes and reduced the lane widths from 10.5 feet to 10 feet, reducing it roughly 9 feet. We did this to reduce impacts to steep driveways, large trees along the corridor, and stream buffers. The properties that we're going to so currently we're at 60% design and we're progressing towards 90% design. We're looking at driveway transitions. The property owners at 19233, 19401, and 19409 68th Avenue Northeast, they expressed concerns regarding the steepness of the driveways and any widening that would occur that would impact those driveways, and also expressed concerns with removing the existing on-street parking that the property owner at 19401 had installed during the King County prior to incorporation. So we had met with the property owners in October of last year to go over their concerns, and they expressed that they would prefer that the improvements not be constructed along their frontage, which is roughly 160 feet. And they wanted that so they could preserve their existing driveways and preserve the existing parking. We basically indicated that that wouldn't meet the intent of the Walkways and Waterways bond measure, and that we would need council approval to do any modification of scope of that nature. So we agreed that we would go back and bring that forth to council and also come up with some design options that could minimize the impacts to the driveways. So we did. So we came up with 4 options. Design option 1 is at the driveways, we'll have a 2-foot wide driveway transition, which will feel sort of like driving over a rolled curb, and a 6-foot continuous sidewalk along the frontage and at the driveways. This roughly, in doing this option, the driveways are currently anywhere from 25 to 30% slope, and with this alternative, by widening it, that having a 6-foot wide sidewalk, all the driveways would increase to 30% slope. And going into the property would range anywhere from 14 feet to, at the 37 feet into the property to regrade their driveways. Essentially, sidewalk along the frontage at the driveway. 401, 8% to grade. And also to go these improvements. Those are the 2 driveway options. Option 3 basically provides the same driveway transitions as option 2, which is option 2, I should say, is the staff recommended option. Option 3, bump out for parking. So, and it's basically construction costs by roughly 40,000. Option 4, and this is the properties for roughly 100 should result in a cost savings. 2, maintains a continuous sidewalk along the frontage, reduces the sidewalk to 4 feet at the driveways. It meets the intent of the Walkways and Waterways bond measure, minimum while maintaining. I should mention that which between on the options that we have, or would you like to look through some of the exhibits to maybe, sure.
Question.
Councilmember Marshall?
So, with the two options in it, if I'm reading this right, that maintain or retain parking spaces, are those parking spaces still in the publicly owned right-of-way?
They are, that's correct. And I should mention that to provide a bump out for the parking, we would need to get approval from the property owner, because we're putting the retaining wall at the back of that sidewalk, which is right on the right-of-way line. So from my understanding, both property owners for both proposed locations for a bump out are fine with granting access. So I don't believe that'll be an issue.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
A couple clarifying questions. So the sidewalk, so there's bike lanes both sides, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, sidewalk on one side, correct?
Sidewalk on one side,
Yeah.
the west side. Correct.
Right, so the opposite side that doesn't have a sidewalk, is there, I mean, what's the kind of public parking? Is there any regulations against people parking on the other side?
The majority of the existing pavement width is going to be repurposed as bike lane. So
Okay.
really, there's not going to be an option to park along 68th once the project is complete
Okay, on either side of the street?
on either side.
Okay. And is there an option, I mean, is there anywhere in that kind of general area? I mean, I did some driving up and down just to look. Is there anywhere in that general area that would have a opportunity for a bump out parking area that wouldn't be so costly?
Unfortunately, it's very, when you get onto the east side, the properties drop off.
Mhm.
There's really no good place. If we widen on the east side, then we're looking at walls on, fill walls versus cut walls. So I think the cost probably would be even more if you do it on the east side. And where you can see some widening or some existing pavement where you think that might be a good spot, there's driveway transitions, and then there's mailboxes, and there's really not a great place to pick, and then you also have the side streets. You got 195th where you could potentially park on the side street if you wanted to.
And this is and these driveways are at 194, correct? 194, so you're talking about one block? away?
It's roughly 400 feet to 195th.
Councilmember Dadusky.
So I'm hearing you correctly that option 3 versus option 5, there isn't a cost savings to moving it south, you don't think?
So not really. We would have to do a little bit of rockery removal with option 3. But I don't feel comfortable reducing the cost right now.
Without knowing?
Without knowing, we kind of put a footprint together and established a very preliminary cost, but I wouldn't want to reduce it at this point. I think if council is amenable to providing a parking, bump out, I think you should assume that's going to be $40,000 at least to do it.
Councilmember Curtis.
So it seems like going northbound, just a little bit north of that area on the east side, there is a wider area. There's a telephone pole there, and because it seems like I've pulled off there to like answer cell phone.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with that.
So there is a spot not too far from there on the other side.
There's guardrail there,
Yeah.
and a lot of that pavement's gonna be purposed as bike lanes. I don't think you're gonna have that 8 feet there. So if we pushed it out a little bit further, then we're into walls, and then a little bit of unknown with the downhill side.
You know which spot I'm talking about?
I do. I went up and down Google Maps today, looking for spots. But it's kind of tricky terrain through there.
Councilmember Smith?
Yeah. Thanks, Kent. Is there, in the other improvements we've made, like along Simons or 80th, and I know we've taken away parking spaces that were in the right-of-way on the street, off-street parking. Is there any similar type situation where we've done this type of thing to accommodate us, a property owner or property owners, where there's anything even remotely like this? And what made me think about it is I'm thinking of one citizen specifically on Simons Road, I remember who was upset about losing some on-street parking right in front when we made those improvements. And I was just wondering if there's anything like that, or where we've experienced a similar type scenario that you can think of.
I can't think of my projects, John.
So when we did the 62nd Avenue sidewalk project, there was some on-street parking on the east side that we did remove, and there were some property owners that were concerned about that, but we made the decision to remove that parking to make room for the sidewalk and some storm drainage improvements.
62nd, on 6, okay.
Yeah, 6-second sidewalks, yeah,
gotcha.
yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Marshall?
Do we have any city attorney legal analysis as to any potential liabilities or otherwise of a city approved parking space in the right-of-way at all? And maybe the city manager knows anything, or you guys, maybe outside your wheelhouse?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
In terms of the potential to, because somebody built improvements in the right-of-way, there's no way that could be vacated. I think it's, you're granted permission to do improvements in the right-of-way, and it's inspected, but it's known that that's still public right-of-way, and at any time, the city could come along and do a project. I don't know if that's where you're kind of going towards.
No, yeah, I understand that, definitely. No, I was thinking about liability.
Liability of parking in the right-of-way?
Yeah, if we had consulted with council at all or anything on that.
Not that I'm aware of.
Are you asking allowing cars to park in a parking spot in the city right-of-way?
Right, and approving that, if this council were to approve it, or the city were to approve it and say, hey, that's fine, I'd be concerned that we'd be doing it before we got a legal analysis as to whether we do have any liability for approving a parking space in the right-of-way.
All right.
Don't think so.
I was going to say, the only condition that I could think of is if we allow something that isn't safe, and we allow the parking in that respect, that would potentially could get us into some trouble. Sight distance, impacting the way pedestrians might be able to access up and down the street, that sort of thing. That's the only thing I can think of.
All right, everybody's had a chance to speak on this issue once, right? Have you spoken once on this yet?
Briefly. Nothing important yet. But Stacy had her hand up.
I'm already 20.
She's already
This would
spoken
be
too.
my second.
All right. Option 5. If that parking spot was closer to the driveway instead of removed, in other words, that curve coming down just went right into the parking spot.
Okay, so extending it towards the driveway?
Yes.
But we'd still need to provide that sidewalk, continuous sidewalk around
Yeah,
it.
you would, but you could sort of start it there, closer to the driveway.
I think we could tweak this design to provide additional length.
I'm not looking so much for additional length, I'm looking perhaps moving it close to the driveway so there was less wall involvement, because you've got the wall bumped out here, whereas if the wall went straight into the
Oh,
driveway.
yeah, so we could-
You could just eliminate part of that wall or straighten it out so it wasn't
Yeah,
quite as long.
we could do that. We could
Yeah.
straighten that out and maybe fill that area in adjacent to that driveway at 19233.
Yeah, okay. Councilmember Danuski.
So, I guess in general, I do see this parking spot a little different than just wanting to have on-street parking in front of your house. There are already pullouts on 68th to speak maybe a little bit to the question before. I know up closer to Kenmore Elementary, in front of those new houses has pullouts. North Shore Townhomes has pullouts. So there are already some pullouts on 68th, but this one, you know, these driveways are very steep, and they're very steep on the other side as well. You know, we're hearing from the uphill neighbors, but the downhill neighbors have the same issue, where a mail truck can't stop in their driveways, a UPS truck can't stop, delivery people can't stop. You know, it's not just like I want to park there because of snow. Like, I can't imagine UPS parking down at the church and walking all the way up to deliver packages. So I do see this as a little bit more of an actual need rather than a want. So, my thought.
Councilmember Curtis.
So I try to answer questions at the highest level first. So for me, the two issues are safety and precedent. And so from the safety standpoint, the citizens of Kenmore with Walkways and Waterways have said 64% of us believe that it's important to put sidewalks and bike lanes along here for the sake of safety. So if the citizens have said that, I think as much as possible, we should try to accomplish that. Then for the precedent, I have two concerns. One is public right-of-way belongs to all 23,000 people in Kenmore. It shouldn't be just for one person or a few people in a very limited area. So if we start giving little bump outs for a couple people here and a few bump outs here, how are we going to tell the next person, sorry, I know we gave them a bump out parking, but we're not going to give you one? Or all the ones on Simons Road that we took theirs away to put in the bike lane. And then the other issue is cost. So it's going to cost us an extra $40,000 to do this bump out. So everybody else who we now have to approve for a special private use of public property, do they get $40,000 as well? So I think the precedent that it sets in individualizing, we have a process that our citizens want to set individual little teeny private benefits and $40,000 with that private benefit, I just think is the wrong way to approach this. So I would be in favor of, you know, we've already made the whole road narrower because of the geography through that area, and I live up on 202nd, so I know this street really well. And honestly, I never walk on that street now unless it's snowed and it's 5 in the morning, because there's no traffic at 5 in the morning when it snows, and I don't drive in the snow. But I look forward to the day I can walk downtown Kenmore on a real sidewalk. So I'm excited about this project from the safety standpoint.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I want to thank staff for the work they did with the neighbors on, at a minimum, making sure that access to their own property through usable driveways is continued, and I think that we see that in option 2. I have a lot of the same concerns that Councilmember Curtis has around spending $40,000 for a parking spot that can be used by just a handful of neighbors. I don't think that that's a great precedent for us to be setting. You know, I understand the usefulness to those neighbors, but again, it's $40,000. We're already hitting some issues with the budgets around walkways and waterways, and every little bit does count at this point. You know, we've done the work to keep the driveways accessible. There is, once the sidewalks are installed, walking up to 195th is not too onerous. There should be plenty of parking up that way. So I'm in favor of option 2.
So I guess I understand Councilmember Curtis's concerns with setting precedent. However, the precedent was set with King County when they permitted this driveway. So we are not adding a bump out. We are allowing them to continue to have a bump out, even though it's in a different place, but we're not taking something away. So I'm more in favor of some sort of compromise in an option 4 or 5. Councilmember Curtis.
I think the difference is that back when King County approved it, 64% of the voters didn't say, for safety reasons, we want sidewalks and bike lanes. So that's what's different, drastically different in my mind, to, you know, when Kenmore was rural and we weren't even a city.
And I'm not talking about getting rid of the bikes and sidewalks, because I agree completely. That's what people voted for. With the bump out, they still have bikes and sidewalk and bike lanes and sidewalks. So anyway, Deputy Mayor.
I mean, this might be a better question for our traffic engineer, but I am a little concerned that having a parking space there that is bumped out with the adjacent bike lane right next to it might create an unsafe environment. People coming and going into that parking space for other traffic using the bike lane.
All right. Councilmember Danuski.
So you're still going to maintain the bump outs on 68th that already exist there. So North Shore Townhomes and up where those newer houses are, there's, I think it's North Shore Town, right south of the church, those little condos. There's a bump out there. There's some mailboxes. And then up by more close to Kenmore Junior High, there's quite a long parking strip on the road with a bike lane already.
Is that on the west side that you're referring to?
Yeah.
I
Fairly
mean, we're
new
putting all
sidewalk.
new sidewalk along the west side, so a lot of that roadway will be repurposed as bike lane and new sidewalk, so.
We would be taking out all that, the west side, all of those parking spaces that are already there for those houses closer to the junior high would be taken out?
No, so
That's
that
fairly new
section along the
sidewalk.
curve was previously built,
Yeah.
the 202nd Street sidewalk improvements. So that, we're just tying in on either end of that limit, so that, those will stay.
Okay, so we already have a bump out with bike lane on that road that will stay that way.
We got some minor widening that we're doing along the outer curve, but the rest is stay.
City Manager.
Yeah, you normally don't do this, but I recommend that you allow the citizens to come up one more time and just say anything additional that might help with this conversation. It's, since it is very specific to them, I think it might be okay for you to allow them to come up and say a few words.
To be on the safe side, then is there consensus to suspend the rules? Because we don't normally do this, to allow the residents to come up and address this. I see 2 people nodding their head, yes. I see 3 people nodding their head, yes. Okay, yes.
So, may I suggest something?
Yes.
I suggest maybe you have a representative come up and, rather than having.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because they're all, I think it would make it easier in
No, I agree with
conversation.
you. So there is consensus to suspend the rules. If we could have a spokesman for the homeowners.
Can I ask a clarification on something the mayor said, if you don't mind? You said about the permit from the county, and you said permit for the driveway, and so, are you,
Permit for the parking spot.
okay, and that's what you
My
said? Yeah, you had
understanding
said
is-
driveway, and I just wanted to make sure I
No,
understood.
the parking spot.
Okay,
So
and that
we're-
was a
we're taking
permit,
it away from
but that was a permit to improve it, right? It wasn't a permit for like specific use.
I don't think so. I don't know
Is
that
that,
for sure.
and,
So
and,
anyway.
because
Okay,
I'm not
well,
aware of one.
I can answer some of these questions for you because I've lived there for 30 years. First of all, I want to thank Kent for all the time he's put in with us to come and review this and go through the process. We really appreciate that more than anybody will ever know. We've felt somewhat left out in the process of the design when the Walkways and Waterways initiative was first proposed. I don't think anybody, including the council, knew the effect that it would have on our specific properties in that section of 68th Avenue. As far as some of the things that you guys have talked about, the geography is the problem there. There is limited space. You cannot put things where there is no land. And we bought a piece of land that we need access to. So we've done our best over the years to make it as accessible and usable, not only for us, but for our neighbors and the community in general. That parking strip gets used for a ton of different things that you guys probably wouldn't even know. How many cars break down or run out of gas in that section of road? We have aid cars and fire trucks that use that road, that parking strip. We have utility vehicles that come in there to service a fire hydrant, and the power poles and the cable that supply our houses. It's not just there as a convenience for us. When I first put that strip in, it was somewhat selfish because I knew I had a steep driveway. When the winters hit, we would have nowhere to park. And there is no real safe place to park a car along 68th that's outside of that parking area. So that is used by the entire community. We have people parked there to go to Swamp Creek Park and walk their dogs. There's already similar parking in other areas. And this design, I developed it from the prints that Kent gave us as an alternative to what had been proposed, because the option 3 that was proposed did carry a fairly large price tag with it. The option that we propose, I think, will be much less than the estimate that they're giving you, because all the options 1 through 4 already have some retaining walls designed into them on either end. And my attempt at showing what this could be is maybe not the reality of what needs to happen. It's an imperfect drawing to simulate what could be done with that particular stretch of road. I don't think we're really asking for a whole lot. We've made a huge sacrifice with our driveway in particular. We're gonna gain 4% in steepness. They're gonna cut my driveway down almost 2 feet, which will steepen the entire length of my driveway, which is close to 70 feet, to a 30+% angle all the way to the bottom of the road. If it's icy, we won't be able to stop before we hit the road. Not only that, but I have, over the years, accumulated some toys, i.e. a boat and a travel trailer, that I can currently get up and down my driveway. After this happens, I may not be able to do that. I may have to resort to putting my trailers in an alternative place to park that's off-site from anywhere here. You know, all I can ask is that you would consider anything that would help us out with some kind of parking in there to, I guess, soften the blow a little bit. I mean, if you look at the diagrams here, I'm driveway 2. That's 2 feet worth of grade out of the middle of my driveway is a huge amount to take in one bite. It's somewhat discouraging to me that over the years that I've lived there, I've put my heart and soul into my home. I moved that house from Lake City to Kenmore. I put it up there. I paid for all the improvements along the road, had the county's blessing to do what I did to benefit me and my neighbors. And when you go to make these improvements, whatever transpires tonight, we've also come to find out that there's more to this project than just the walkways and waterways. That they're going to be relocating the gas, the sewer, and the water lines down 68th Avenue. So we're looking at having this road tore up for somewhere between 1 and 2 years. it's gonna impact our lives for that long to put in sidewalks, that they'll benefit some people, and yeah, it may increase the value of our resale somewhere down the road, but in the interim, we're stuck with maybe inaccessibility to our houses. It's a huge thing to swallow that I don't think anybody's really taken into consideration. You're looking at me and my wife and one other homeowner. The other homeowner couldn't be here tonight. She's a 911 operator. Her husband is a Seattle police officer. Up Kirk's driveway, there's a second house. So there's 4 of us that live on one side of the road, plus 4 of us that live on the other side of the road. So don't just think of it as us 3 as being the issue or the people that are gonna benefit from it. It actually benefits 8 households. So I would hope that you would really seriously consider some kind of alternative besides just taking away our amenity that we've paid for, maintained, and utilized over the last 30 years.
Thank you, Mr. Morone.
Thank you.
Councilmember Marshall.
Do we have a copy of the permit from King County or any other pronouncement from King County? Is there any such document? No, I mean the parking lot or the parking space. Oh. Yeah, there's apparently a specific permission for it.
Well,
we're getting into two-way stuff here, and we don't normally do that. So.
I mean, it falls under what my understanding of it was fell under the grading permit and the driveway right-of-way. And when we moved the house up there, it was somewhat in flux of how the driveway and stuff was going to be configured. And the county has a drainage pipe that goes underneath the road there. And we needed to work around that drainage situation to catch what was coming along 68th Avenue to the north and what was going under the road to the east. We needed to build a catch basin in our driveway to form that corner of our driveway. At the point in time that I had the county come out to inform me or instruct me on what I could and couldn't do with that area, they basically told me, not our problem. You want your driveway there? You need to figure out how you're gonna fix it. They didn't help me with design or anything until I had things pretty much laid out and was in the process of finishing things. Then they came out and reviewed it and said, okay, looks great to us, we'll sign off on it. It was somewhat of a handshake deal. We knew that the retaining wall that we put in to retain our front yard was necessary to keep our front yard off of the road, and that we knew part of it was in the right-of-way. There's never been a question about whose land is whose. It's just been kind of, I guess, grandfathered in, without a better word for it, that the county let us do this. It's the way it's been since before the city was incorporated, and we're just asking that the resource that we developed for our 8-person community or 8-household community would somehow remain intact, or even if it's relocated, that we have that amenity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We really need to, I mean, unless there's something brand new you need to add to this.
Things I wanted to point out in that much time.
Okay, quickly.
I need you to come to the podium. Thank you.
But quickly, because we really need to move on. We've got more on the agenda.
I promise. Super
and-
quickly. I just wanted to point out to the comments about setting a precedent that, you know, this isn't really something where a precedent is being set, in my opinion, because there's public parking throughout Kenmore on a lot of different neighborhood streets and stuff. So this parking is really no different. It's used as the public in that part of the area. No one's restricted from using it at all. And then my second thing that I really want you guys to really consider and understand is that all the other places on 68th and other neighborhoods where you've either kept or taken away parking, these are all properties that are accessible at a pretty relatively flat or a slight incline level. And right here where we're talking about is property where the driveways already go like this. So our situation is different just by the sheer slope of these driveways. If we could pull off and just be, you know, in the bottom half, you know, of the driveway or whatever, you know, without like this, you know, it'd be one thing. Same thing with, you know, delivery trucks or anything else. You know, it's better to have them have somewhere to go than have them be parked partially on 68th Avenue with the traffic whizzing by. That creates as much liability or whatever as looking at some way to kind of keep it where there's room to have that functionality. So those are my two comments. Thank you for letting me add them.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Any further questions? So we need to make a decision here, and the decision is to authorize staff to proceed with design option 2 for driveway transitions at 19233, 19401, and 19409 68th Avenue Northeast. So is there a motion? Councilmember Curtis.
I'd like to make a motion to go for design option 2 as recommended by staff.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Marshall.
Before I'd like to proceed tonight, I don't think I could approve anything without knowing for the options that allow a parking space, and I'm interested in the options that allow for a parking space, what liability might be. So I'd want council's review of what potential liabilities to the city might be.
So, okay. Councilmember Shrubnik?
So option 2 doesn't feature that, just to be clear. The proposal was.
Any further?
Well, if I can just add, and again, I can't speak for our legal counsel, but I'm confident that the city can put in an on-street parking space with minimal or no liability if it's designed properly, and we would make sure that it would be designed properly, as John was talking about. We provide on-street parking throughout the city, the angled parking on 181st, and then parallel parking on 181st and 68th Avenue, down in the downtown. So we're already providing parking spaces in the right-of-way in various parts of the city. And as long as we don't have any design flaws that would hurt safety, then we should be okay.
All right. Any further discussion? The motion in front of us then is to authorize staff to proceed with design option 2 as staff recommends. Any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Mayor Baker,
No.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig,
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall,
No.
Councilmember Shrubnik,
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis,
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski.
No.
Motion passes 4-3.
Passed. 4-3, yep.
All right. Next item on the agenda is 2019 annual docket for the Planning Commission. Ms. Anderson.
Hello again. So I think you had a preview of this at your retreat, but the next item for your consideration is approval of the 2019 docket. As you know, the municipal code sets out a process for establishing the work program for the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission considers comprehensive plan amendments and then some development regulation amendments. And the docket is basically the Planning Commission's work program for the year. So private applicants have the opportunity to apply for amendments, and that happens every November. We have not had private requests in the last few years, and we did not receive any this year. So there are none before you tonight. Threshold criteria are provided in the municipal code, and those are described in your agenda packet. And we are recommending 4 items for the docket. The first is the continuation and final recommendation on the critical area regulations and shoreline master program. The second thing is the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. Third thing is a review of our ADU regulations. That's one of the top housing strategy plan priorities. And then last, consideration of incentives for office development, and that is part of the economic development strategy. So a 5th item could be review of the capital facilities element if that was needed, if we have some project that comes up later in the year that would need an adjustment there. So once you set the docket, the Planning Commission reviews the materials, makes their recommendations to you, and that's basically what is before you. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
So do you mean to say that I don't get to spend another 2 years playing with the critical areas ordinance?
Well, I certainly hope not, since
You've taken
June
that
30 is
away?
our deadline.
You've taken that away from council, huh?
No, I expect their recommendation will be with you this spring. And again, June 30 is the deadline.
But I
for
had
the
so
state.
much fun with critical area
I
ordinance.
know, it was a long process.
All right. Any questions? Councilmember Marshall.
Would the critical areas ordinance then take up that question that the city manager did address of Heron buffers, or was that already addressed, do you know?
So the current critical area regulations have a heron buffer in place. The proposed regulations will also have a heron buffer in place, although the science has changed on that, so the number is different. But that is in the regulations. The
So
draft
that's going to be
regulations.
considered.
The Planning Commission has looked at that. It will be, again, coming to the council this spring for
Great,
final
thank you.
decision.
Then it's likely to be a reduced buffer based on the
Correct.
science, correct?
Correct.
All right, so the staff is looking for authorization of the Planning Commission's 2019 docket. There's no further. Councilmember Shrevenick.
On the critical areas, is that going to, I think I might have mentioned this before, relook at the geotech of what is considered a critical area at this point? I mean, we were surprised
geohazard?
to learn that about our own property when it apparently 40 years ago had been designated, and
So
we weren't apprised.
the way are you specifically interested in the geotech aspect, or how we're doing all critical area mapping?
Well, I'm only familiar with the
Okay,
with the one,
so-
but I don't know if that's the
right.
same kind of process for all.
So for wetlands and streams, I'm going to go over this really quickly. We have taken the best available information we have. We had an intern who did a lot of background research, so we've tried to update locations and typing as best as we could. And for the geotechnical work, we have the new state LIDAR information, which will help specifically with high landslide hazard areas. The mapping that we provide is only that mapping, preliminary mapping, and never is a critical area in the city of Kenmore discounted if it's not on a map. So if during development review, for example, a wetland were to be found that was not on the map, the presence of the wetland is what controls the regulations. So.
I serve on the Shoreline Hearings Board and just spent 3 days in Kashmir, Washington, listening to wetlands. And I was reminded about our entrance to St. Edward State Park and some of our roadside areas. that because birds do their droppings there, and because they're in water part of the year, these roadsides are now considered wetlands. Are we going to get into the definitions in this of wetlands and man-made wetlands?
So we are getting into the definition. We are moving to the state definitions. That's what's being recommended so far so that we are consistent. Kenmore has had unique typing systems for wetlands and streams since 2006. We are moving away from that because it causes confusion for applicants when we have one set of regulations and the state has a different set. So yes, we are looking at that issue. As to the specific wetland in question, I know nothing about it, and I am not a scientist. So hopefully when we come forward and bring our scientists with us, they may have some insights for you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that we are consolidating on one set of critical area ordinances. Councilmember Marshall.
Does presence of amphibians going to play a part in the definition,
No.
do you know?
No.
No?
It's plant life.
Okay,
It's strictly plant life.
okay. And the definition has changed over the years, right? It
The-
used to be a
the-
prevalence of vegetation, I think, and now I've seen language about a dominance.
I'm not sure about that. There are 3 parameters: soils, vegetation, and water that affect and the definition has morphed very slightly over the last many years, but the typing has changed, I think, to some degree. So, right. I would say this, and then we can get back to the docket, but this is a huge project, these critical area amendments, and I know that it's going to be a lot of material that comes to you. So if you need some light reading sometime and you want to follow along with the Planning Commission, I would encourage you to do so. That's it.
And
There's
when
my
is this
pitch.
when is this coming back to us?
This spring,
I see. And then how many years after that do you think we will finally
June
pass?
30th, 2019.
Good luck. All right. We're looking for council to authorize the Planning Commission's 2019 docket. This one is pretty straightforward. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The Planning Commission's 2019 docket is approved unanimously.
Thank you.
All right. My goodness, we're actually getting down to this. I think, if I'm reading this correctly, the last item on the agenda is the staff report on federal government shutdown impact on the West Sammamish River Bridge project.
Looking to John if he wants to jump in, but even though the shutdown has ended, and I call it a temporary ending of the shutdown, temporary ending, because it's only good through February 15th, and then probably be right back to where we were. But even though the shutdown is over, that doesn't mean that everything's fine and we're back on track again. These federal agencies have a backlog of work waiting for them today when they got back to work, and so our congressional delegation has been working the phones today, and especially Congresswoman Del Bene's office. They've been talking to the agencies and trying to emphasize to the agencies how important our project is and trying to make it a priority. So haven't heard if they are going to put us to the top of the stack, but at least we have some great advocates from our congressional delegation working for us. So goal is still to go out to bid on February 11th, but again, that's dependent on if we get the green light, and so.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
I was under the impression that WASDOT gave us a green light to go out to bid. It was just when we get the contractor, we can't sign until we have the federal signatures. Is that, did I?
Yeah,
misunderstand?
that's correct, but it's
Okay.
still risky for us to do that, yeah. But
Yeah, so we did get the green light to go to add and to award. The risk for us is whether or not we get the property rights we're trying to secure and if we get all of our permits. We have time until we open bids where there's no risk, and then as we open bids and we continue on, the risk starts to grow. So, but we do have an out that if we find that the risk is just too much, we can cancel everything before we actually give a notice to proceed without any risk. So.
Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Councilmember comments, reports, and initiatives. Councilmember Smith.
Nothing, thank you.
Councilmember Danuski.
Nothing, Dad.
Councilmember Marshall.
This evening, Mr. Banks alerted me to the possibility that Trust for Public Land might be interested in some sort of project regarding the Lake Point area or lands. So totally new to me, don't have any information, but I'd like to get some more information and let the council know what it looks like or what is anticipated.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Two things. I know earlier I had suggested I would ask for folks to kind of sign on to the statement about the SOV permit. I think Rod heard what we had to say, and certainly I was surprised that he actually looked at the public comment that was on Facebook. So I'm fully satisfied on that front, and also just wanted to, and I know they're gone, but say how excited I am about the As If Theater Group, and I know I'm going to be there on opening night.
Councilmember Curtis.
A minor point on the government shutdown. I'm at the bottom of the list. I'm waiting for my 1099 form so I can legally send out my 1099s to the workers who have hired this last year.
Well, there's 5 million letters that they had to open today, so I wouldn't hold my breath.
I put mine in by email request, and I did it on the 3rd of January.
All right. Deputy Mayor.
Nothing to add.
So I'm not sure whether I mentioned this, so I'm just going to do it, and if I have, then tell me to shut up. Eastside's Legislative Breakfast, I went to with the Bothell Chamber, and I was part of a panel with Senator Representative Harmsworth. Former Representative Harmsworth, Palumbo, Senator Hasagawa, Senator Kuderer, and then there was Mayor Chelmanack, Mary Lou Polly Penny Sweet, and Matt Larson, and we discussed issues that were important to our communities on transportation, housing, and education. It was a fun panel, and actually it was really quite good. All cities mentioned what we were doing, and so it was a good spreading of information. So I was very pleased to participate in that. And if there is no further business to come before us, we are adjourned.